It was the summer of 2005. A friend of mine, Wayne, and I decided to spend the day fishing at Upper Swagger Lake in the Lost River mountain range of Idaho. Visited mostly by locals, this alpine lake is tucked up on the ridge overseeing two long, dry canyons on opposite sides. It sits just at the top of the tree line, providing an uninhibited view of the sky and surrounding mountain peaks. The fishing is usually pretty good, if you like golden trout, that is. Personally, I hate trout. They just taste like mud. But I do love fishing, and some of the best, most secluded lake fishing can be found on these high Idaho lakes. Getting to the lake is not an easy task though. It's a 100-mile journey over a lonely highway from the region's largest town, Idaho Falls. When you hit the dirt road turnoff, there are miles of four-wheel driving up the canyon to the hiking trail. Once at the trailhead, it's a 2-mile or 1,000-foot vertical gain hike up to the lake. But when you finally arrive, surrounded by the bald peaks of the Little Lost Range, it is well worth the effort. So, arriving at the lake at around noon, we spent the day fishing, relaxing and chatting. Far down in the canyon, out of sight from us, we continually heard periodic loud blasts. Growing up in the rural US, you get accustomed to people target shooting in public land, and that's what we concluded was happening below us. From the sheer thunderousness, we guessed that it was a larger caliber muzzle-loading rifle. The blasts were paced out long enough, though, that they had to be manually reloading their guns. The shots reverberated and echoed throughout the canyon, though. Whoever was down there was definitely having a bit of fun with their rifle. Unperturbed by the cacophony down in the canyon, we continued fishing, only momentarily reminded of the explosions as they continued to occur throughout the day. The fishing was actually really great that day, and the day just seemed to really flash by us. But before we knew it, the sun was cresting on the mountains, and so we headed back to camp for the night. Wayne had caught his limit towards the end of the day, while I had been releasing mine. We settled down at the campfire, and we watched the sun sink behind the mountain peaks as Wayne cooked his muddy fish up. It was twilight now, and aside from the crackling of the fire, it was a quiet evening. The sky was absolutely clear, and we watched as the stars twinkled into existence in the sky. Our relaxation, though, was interrupted by yet another one of those thunderous explosions. Only this time it was much closer to us. That was weird. Target shooting is extremely dangerous at night. Whoever was down there in the canyon was being pretty irresponsible. Wayne nudged me with his elbow and motioned for me to look in the direction of the sound that the last explosion came from. And while not directly visible to us, there was a light down in the mountain. It was illuminating the whole canyon. From the angle of the tree shadows, we could see the source of the light was not at ground level too. It was actually up high in the air, and it seemed to be moving. We watched in bewildered silence as the light moved up the canyon. We still could not get a direct line of sight of it. There was another blast that seemed to shake my skull this time. The light in the canyon flashed almost 100 times brighter than before. We could absolutely not make sense of anything that was happening at this point. As we sat there, though, unsure of what to do, the light rose upwards out of the canyon. As it crested the trees and continued to rise, we could finally get a direct look at this thing. It was a brilliant ball of yellow golden light. Getting a size estimate was difficult, but I figured it was between maybe 20 to 40 feet in diameter. The light rose silently above the canyon and then above our elevation at the lake. It stopped several hundred feet above the surrounding landscape and just stayed there. The object's surface shimmered and danced as we watched it. Little feathers of sparks would periodically jump away from the object and fall down towards the trees below. Wayne looked at me, and all I could do was shrug my shoulders and give him a "I have no idea" look. After a few minutes, though, the ball's surface stopped dancing. It was completely still in the air above us. No sound, no movement. With no warning, it exploded in a deafening shower of sparks and blinding light. Wayne and I instinctively jumped into the dirt and covered our heads. The light was so bright that I felt I could see through my closed eyelids. The explosion shook everything around us as well. I could feel the shock resonate in the ground beneath me. It was like the world was coming undone at the seams. Then, all of a sudden, everything was absolutely silent and dark. The whole event could have only been a handful of seconds long, but it felt like hours. When we looked up into the sky, the ball of light was now gone. We were left alone in just the dim light of the stars. Picking myself up out of the dirt, all I could say to Wayne was, "What in the heck was that all about?" He chuckled nervously but didn't reply. We surveyed the camp and the surrounding area. Nothing seemed damaged or disturbed. There were no signs of fires that were started from the explosion. In fact, it was like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The one thing that was off, though, was the time. It was late twilight when the light exploded above us, but my watch was showing 2 o'clock in the morning now. Further baffling us was Wayne's fish. They were now charred cinders above a bed of red coals that was once our campfire. Now, I'm well aware of the phenomenon of missing time, but that was just not possible. The stupid thing exploded, we hit the dirt, and then when we picked ourselves up, I don't know, it couldn't have been more than a couple of minutes from the explosion to us getting up like that. I didn't have the mental capacity to process what had happened. I headed to my tent and I went right to sleep. It was a deep, dreamless sleep that night, and when I awoke in the morning, the sun was illuminating the tent. Wayne was already up and fishing. I asked him about his thoughts on what happened last night, and he simply shrugged and said it either didn't happen or we saw something that we probably shouldn't have. It's that or Marvin the Martian tried to kill us or something. We fished for a few hours that morning, then decided against camping another night at the lake. We packed up camp and we hiked down to our vehicle. This happened almost 20 years ago now, and I've been back to that lake several times over the years. I've never seen or heard anything like what we saw that night again. I don't have an explanation for what happened, and to be honest, I really don't believe that we ever will. I live in Australia, and we don't have much woodlands here besides a few that span on for a couple of 100 acres or so. Nothing like what Americans have. And when I was younger, I'd get lost in these woods a lot, I guess, and sometimes even sleep in them for a couple of days, at most surviving off fish and creek water. I never had any creepy encounters, besides this one time. So I was about 10 years old, and just like I do at least once every 2 or 3 years, I had gotten lost in the woods again. I was completely fine during the day, as I had eaten an hour prior to realizing that I had no idea where I was. So I had the old, "oh no" moment, here we go again, and decided to walk around to find some sticks to make a little fire. I knew a lot about outdoor survival as my family went camping a lot, and I watched videos on YouTube all the time since it interested me and I love the woods. I had set a fire up as it started getting dark and was about to put out my fire before I saw a small deer on the tree line, just nearly out of range of my fire's light. It was staring at me, which gave me an odd feeling, but I just went, a little deer, and waved to it. The deer scurried off into a bush behind it, and I couldn't see it anymore. But then I heard this really weird noise like twigs snapping, and all of a sudden a much larger deer came out of the same bush that I just saw the small one jump into. At this point, I knew something was off, so I stood up and stared at the deer as it stared back at me, and I was mentally preparing myself for the idea that this thing, it may run at me. I was a kid back then, and I mean, what am I supposed to think? The deer started walking a bit towards me, and I sort of backed up a little bit, crouched down, but as the deer kept getting closer and I kept backing up, I looked down and realized that this thing had a hoof directly in the fire and wasn't reacting to it at all. This obviously creeped me out a lot. I mean, his fur was burning and it was starting to burn its skin, but it just wasn't reacting. I immediately set off bolting at this, but I heard it running after me. Well, not really running, but fast enough to keep up with my little legs. I came over this small hill and jumped down into a bush to try and hide from it, and that's when it happened. The scariest thing that I've ever seen, and I remember it vividly. The deer's silhouette against the moonlight appeared, and as I stared at the deer, it let out this blood-curdling call that I've never heard from another animal before, and all of a sudden the silhouette started caving in on itself. I could sort of hear its bones snapping and flesh ripping, and this thing just kept getting smaller and smaller, and then suddenly it got much bigger, and I closed my eyes because I just couldn't watch it anymore. When I opened them, there was what appeared to be a man standing where the deer stood, or at least the silhouette of a man. He was looking around and then started calling out in his creepy, almost distorted voice, "Hello," and he repeated this for about 10 minutes while I just sat there in silence, refusing to answer whatever the heck stood just a couple of meters above me. The man then just walked off into the trees, and I heard that same awful snapping noise before it eventually faded away. Obviously, I didn't sleep that night. In fact, I stayed in that bush the rest of the night, terrified that this thing could still be lurking around the area, waiting for me to appear again. Once the morning came, I walked in a straight line until I reached a road that I recognized, and then I just ran home. I never did tell my family about this, as I feared I wouldn't be taken seriously, but I was completely terrified. In fact, I haven't been into the woods since that day, and I always just stayed home when my family went camping after begging them not to go. I'm 21 now. That incident was like 10 to 11 years ago, and I still remember that silhouette and the noise of the bones snapping. I've done tons of research, and my only conclusion to what happened is that I narrowly escaped a skinwalker. It was a horrific night, and it's something that I don't like to retell often. But if anyone has any other explanation as to what this could have been, then please do tell me, because I would love to have my mind put at ease. This happened in New South Wales, Australia, in the late 70s or early 80s. I can't remember exactly, but it was well before I was born. So back in those days, people used to hitchhike a lot. My mum and her friend, they were heading into Sydney to party, and so they wandered along the road with their thumbs out until they got a ride. Mum sat in the back, her friend in the front, and the guy who picked them up seemed friendly enough, chatty and polite, and he was happy to drive them into Sydney. It wasn't until they noticed the car was heading the wrong way that things took a turn. They were not going towards the city, but heading deeper into the forest. The driver had now gone silent too. Finally, one too many turns had been taken in the wrong direction. It was palpably obvious that they were not heading into Sydney, so one of them was like, "What the heck is going on? Where are you taking us?" He broke his silence then just to say, "You just shut up and sit there. You're going where I take you." What he didn't realize was that in spite of being a small and pretty woman, my mum, well, she was my mum, and she was sitting behind him. She took her pocket knife out of her bag, unfolded it, reached through and put the blade very firmly against his throat, and she said in his ear, "If you even try to touch my hand, I will kill you. Turn this car around right now and drive us into Sydney." He didn't say a word. He just turned the car around and drove towards the city, and my mum sat up and kept that blade pressed against his throat right up until the minute that he pulled over, and then her and her friend got out of the car. And when she got out of the car, He drove away quickly. I, a 21-year-old female, lived with my grandparents for most of my life, up until last year, that is. I've never been as in tune to the supernatural as my brother was. I've seen very few things, and after what I've seen, I think that I'd like to keep it that way, to be honest. The first time I recall seeing this thing was when I was about 18. I was talking with my ex-boyfriend in his car after an argument, and I just so happened to look out towards my grandma's van, and that was when I saw it. It looked like my ex, but faceless, and it was wearing something completely different than what he was. I knew it wasn't a reflection. It was even facing a different way. I didn't say anything to him. I don't know why. I just tried to ignore it, and eventually it just seemed to go away when I looked away. I eventually forgot about this incident, and I just went on with life. A few years ago, though, I started smoking outside with my brother at night because I found out that the only thing that actually puts me to sleep is smoking. Sometimes I'd have to go out alone, and I started seeing this thing again at some point. Honestly, I thought that I was hallucinating at first, but I never saw it anywhere but outside of my house. It looked like my mum once, and when it looked like my brother, it was especially horrifying. It was the realest I'd ever felt, and it just sort of stared at me. It even bent over to look at me from behind the van like my brother would have because he's so tall. It looked like me once, but it took the form of my dressed up all pretty, and it felt like it was, I don't know, like mocking me almost. And it got harder to ignore it every time. I could feel it. I could feel it looking at me. It never spoke to me or anything. The face would just morph and twist sometimes. I don't think it wanted to hurt me because it never came close or moved. But I stopped going outside alone after that, and I've started staying with my current boyfriend, and I haven't seen it since. My brother has been seeing it longer than I have. He said that on multiple occasions, it had actually chased him back into the house as a fully black shadow figure. He saw it on our laundry room today looking like our mum again, and says that he hears our grandma call his name through the house when she isn't home. So my question is, do you think that we're dealing with a mimic? I've heard about these before from reading other stories elsewhere, but I don't know. I guess I just don't want to believe it, but everything seems to point in that direction, so yeah. This is a story that I still get chills looking back on, and for two of our dogs, honestly, they saved our lives that night and they deserve some recognition. So this whole thing happened when I was maybe 12. I'm nearly 17 now. Me and my sister, who was 14 or 15 at the time, were staying home alone while our parents were at my little brother's hockey game. We lived in a fairly safe neighborhood. Hardly anything ever happened. Everybody knew everybody, and almost everybody got along pretty well and liked each other. So we felt safe as we didn't have a reason not to, really. Our front door was locked, our back door was locked, but our side door didn't lock at that time because it was broken. But no one ever used it anyways, so my dad hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet. Me and my sister, we were in the living room watching TV and doing homework when we heard the fence outside of our house making some noise. It sort of sounded like someone had jumped over the fence. So my sister looked through the blinds and, sure enough, someone had jumped the fence. Two people actually, and they were dressed in mostly black, with like a hospital mask over their faces. We freaked out and we hid in between the couches in the living room. When we heard the front doorknob wiggle, of course it was locked, so it didn't open. But we knew that whoever it was would go to the side door next, and that one would open. In that moment, I was the most terrified that I had ever been. But once the door handle started jiggling loud enough that my dogs had woken up, at that time I had a Tosa and a Rottweiler. Once one started barking, so did the other one, and eventually it was just absolute pure beautiful chaos. That was also when we heard them scream, "They've got dogs." Then we heard the fence make the same noise again, as if someone jumped over it. Later that night, a local gas station near my house got robbed by 2 armed men, and the news report showed the same people that we had seen, same outfits and everything, except this time we got to see their faces. Our dogs truly may have saved our lives that night. The funny thing is that our dogs are the biggest lovers. They may be loud and bark, but they wouldn't bite or attack, well, anybody. This was the one time, though, that I was very glad that these dog breeds are associated with being quite scary and aggressive, because clearly they scared off whoever wanted to break in that night. I've been working as a property agent in the UK for the past 8 years, selling and renting all sorts of property. And over the years, I've had a few experiences that I couldn't quite explain, and I thought that I would share one of them. So this story happened around November of 2018. I remember because earlier that day, a colleague and I had started filming that year's Christmas videos to go on our company's social media. Each year we'd recreate a scene of a Christmas movie, and that year was the dance scene from Love Actually. Anyway, I'd been asked by my manager to go and take a photo of a house that we'd just been given the go-ahead on the rent. The house was a 3-bedroom grade 2 listed mid-terrace from around the 16th century. For anyone not knowing, a grade 2 listed property basically means that it's old and has a lot of original features that can't be changed without special permissions. This was the first time that we'd let the property for the landlord and the tenant before we later found out that he had left the property while still in the contract, within the first 6 months. Now, I knew something wasn't right as soon as I set foot in the property. Everyone gets times when the vibes are off, and I'm not someone who claims to be in touch with their spiritual side or anything, but the atmosphere when I went in was just downright hostile. I was already a little spooked, but I had a job to do, so I opened up a playlist on Spotify, hit shuffle, and started turning the lights on. I have a bit of a system when photographing a property too. Lights on, photograph, measure the room, lights off. The house was your standard layout too. Living room, kitchen, dining room downstairs, 3 bedrooms and bathroom upstairs, with another flight of stairs up to the loft, attic for my American friends. The downstairs I did just fine, trying to ignore the bad vibes by singing along to my probably ABBA or something that I don't remember. But what I do remember though is my trip upstairs. As soon as my foot hit the first step, this overwhelming urge that something was wrong surged through my body. I started singing louder, trying to distract myself, and another few steps up, I was hit with another surge of fear. I tell myself that the upstairs must have been in some sort of dead zone, because it was at this stage that my phone decided that the songs that it had no problem playing 10 minutes ago suddenly needed buffering, meaning that my ABBA was now playing in fits and starts. I fought against my body to get up to the top of the stairs, and when I did, my eyes were drawn to the door to the attic stairs, which lay ajar, and as soon as I did, I was done for. The room beyond the doorway was cloaked in darkness due to the lack of lights being turned on, and the fear that was pushing through my body just took over me. I stood there, paralyzed. I couldn't even blink or take my eyes off of the shadows that lay beyond the doorway. My lungs became like cement as I struggled to catch my breath, my words now breathless. I stood there for what felt like an hour before my phone started to ring. It was the office. We have office protocol to check in if we've been longer than expected. I fumbled to find the answer button, eyes still fixed to the darkness. I hit answer and managed to struggle out a help. This house was walking distance to the office, so it wasn't long before my colleague arrived to check up on me. As soon as I heard his voice call out my name, I felt the weight lift immediately, and I cried out his name in response. I ran downstairs to meet him, and the music returned far too loud, which gave us both a bit of a shock. We both got out of there, and not even checking if the door was locked properly. It was one of those Yale locks that auto-lock when you pull them, so it was fine. We headed back to the office. On the walk back, I noticed a pain shooting across my neck, though, and when we got back to the office, I checked to see 3 long scratches running diagonally across my back. This made absolutely no sense to me. I explained what had happened to the others in the office, and my manager told us that she had had a similar feeling when she met the landlord. Maybe because she was with someone it wasn't as scary, but after that we made sure that whenever we visited that property that we were always accompanied. I'm not sure what actually happened to that house in the end. Surprise, surprise, we struggled to find people who could live in that bad vibe house, and the landlord gave it another agent to try and sell in the end. Not long after, I moved to another company as well and onto other properties, which I was grateful for. Like I said, I've had other experiences too, but this was definitely the scariest, and perhaps the strangest too, with the scratches appearing just like that. Maybe one day I'll share the other stories if people are interested, but in any case, thanks for listening. During the fires that consumed Mount Charleston, Nevada, my parents drove out to the mountain when the roads were clear. They described the wildlife to be running around the car as they drove through the open road. My dad told my mum to stop the car, and he got out and started walking through the desert. He realizes that the wilderness is running, including snakes and other deadly animals. He also witnesses what looks like a moose or an elk in the distance that was looking at him, walked off in the direction of the rabbits and other wildlife. As he gets in the vehicle, though, both my parents and his father describe seeing a tall man crouched in front of the car all of a sudden, wings draped over his back. As he stands and faces them, his wingspan was wide enough to cover the entire 2-lane road. He then lifted off of the ground in 4 swooshes. They described him as muscular, 6 or an 8-pack, broad shoulders, arms and legs. But the face was apparently mesmerizing. They said that it was hard to describe his face, but it wasn't human. Based on what they said, it sounded a lot like a man-bird. The Mothman was a topic of discussion for them to decide if it was the Mothman, so I guess it probably resembled something like this. If anyone has had any similar stories about this creature or from this area, then please do share it with me, because I really want to try to understand exactly what they say they saw. This happened when I was 16, maybe 17, in the woods of Leelanau County, Michigan. So I was on vacation with family in northern Michigan when we visited a family friend who had lived in the center of the county in a dense forest. I remember when we pulled up the road the house was on was a gravel road instead of a paved road. I remember looking down the gravel road and seeing it go down a hill and turn to the left in the forest. A few hours passed by and I decided to go and check out where the gravel road went. I remember feeling extremely nervous because we were in black bear country, as I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and never really experienced bears before. When I got into the top of the hill, I remember hearing birds chirping and lots of frogs croaking. The forest felt alive, I guess is what I'm saying, and I did not feel terribly unsafe, only nervous because of the possible presence of bears. As I started walking down the hill, I started whistling the Hunger Games 4-tone whistle, and as I got midway down the hill, I noticed that the birds and the frogs stopped making noise, and the forest fell silent. At this point, my instincts kicked in, and I knew that something was wrong. I remembered learning that the forest goes silent when there's a predator around. Yet, I still kept going down the hill. I was determined to know what was at the bottom of it. I was still whistling the same 4-tone whistle when I heard something whistle it back perfectly. it made the exact same sound that I made, and it sounded very oddly humanoid, like there was a person watching me, a predator. I remember being frozen in fear, just staring at the area of forest that it came out of before turning around and walking back up the hill. When the house came into view again, I sprinted until I got inside, and I didn't leave anyone's eyesight for the rest of the night. Since then, I have not had any encounters like this, and I've never been back to that area. I don't know if it was something paranormal or if perhaps there was an actual person watching me down there. Both equally terrify me to this day. But if anyone knows of any legends from northern Michigan, from that county, then please do let me know, because I have been thinking about this a lot. So I want to preface this by saying that I've always been more of a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I would consider myself one that leans more towards a grounded science view, and one that wants to believe but would need to experience it myself to actually believe. I'm also aware that sharing this is going to yield some amount of confirmation bias, since most here I would assume are going to lean towards believing, but maybe not, who knows. Anyway, a bit of background. My dad's side of the family lives in a home that eventually became the place of death of my nana. She went into hospice when her health deteriorated enough and eventually passed peacefully in her home on the first floor living room in a hospice bed that was set up specifically for her. Nothing weird ever really happened after this to my knowledge as well. Anyway, fast forward to a few years back, my dad has inherited the home and has moved back from across the country with a cat and has since adopted a second cat. Over a few years, I was able to work towards mending things with him, born of a complicated past. Just this summer though, his health took a rapid turn and he became essentially bedridden and a fall risk, so we sort of set up a bed for him downstairs in the same area that our nana was in. Unfortunately, he passed just a few days ago and I'm now grieving. He passed away not in the home but in the hospital. It's also important to say that he was home literally the day before, and in one day he went to the ER and he passed away the following early morning. I've been going over daily to start sorting through important paperwork and taking care of his cats. It was tough going into the house the first time, and I always give a "Hey Dad" greeting coming in, knowing that I won't get a reply, but it's just part of being open and vulnerable in my healing, and I did it prior to his death. And no, this story doesn't lead to hearing a greeting back or anything. But the first night there, just the prior night to sharing this and the encounter, was uneventful, but I bawled my eyes out at the foot of his bed and pretty much every room in the house as well. Before I left, I laid in his bed downstairs and the cats jumped up to join me for snuggles. This evening though, at 8 p.m, I went over and conducted some of the goals that I had. When the goals were done, I did what I did the previous evening and laid down in his bed. His two loving kitties joined me and I was sending text to my mum, and this is when it happens. So I'm laying there and suddenly this full body chill just hits me. I'm in a tank top and athletic shorts, but I run hot and I've always been very warm in the house. Plus, I'd been moving around a lot just prior to laying down. Really, there was no reason to have chills. Anyway, I get the chills, literally covered in goosebumps head to toe, hair standing at attention every inch of my body. And right at this moment, which happened within seconds, both of the cats reacted like lightning fast and raised their heads and were looking like something startled them. Chills are one thing, right? But the reaction of two furry friends at the exact same time, this is what really sold it for me. All three of us laid there. I wasn't exactly scared, and I don't scare easy these days, but it definitely had me shocked and rattled a bit, unable to process what the heck is happening, so it's difficult to articulate the exact emotion that I was experiencing. But I started to communicate as if it was my dad telling him how much I loved and missed him. Then I realized that maybe this is my nana. Then I pretty much just said, whoever this is. The whole time, though, I felt this full-body feeling of something being there, and the cats were also still more or less focused on whatever this thing had their collective attention on. One cat eventually got up to walk to the water bowl area, and the other cat, I think, just sort of relaxed, but I still had chills everywhere. After this, I got up feeling a bit uncomfortable with the realization that my world and possibly entire system of non-belief was perhaps shattered at this moment. I had chills and bumps the entire time that I brought items to my truck outside, getting ready to leave and forget something inside. I was half expecting to see something when I went back in and was on the edge and moving a bit quicker at this point. So I said my goodbyes and departed, unable to explain or rationalize any of this. I shared this with my wife as soon as I got home, and my 4-month-old as well was staring wide-eyed, looking captivated the whole time. It was actually pretty cute. I also will be sharing this with my mum and sister tomorrow, and had simply texted them saying that something happened. I can't explain and I need to share this. But if you have any input or thoughts, questions or comments, then they're all welcome. Thanks for hearing me out. I guess I'm not as skeptical anymore and think that it was either my nana or, wishfully, my dad coming back to his home. And as a reminder, Nana passed away in the home, but Dad passed away in the hospital. He spent a lot of time in this very bed, though. Let me start this by saying that I've never truly believed in ghosts. I never wanted to, nor drew any interest into believing in the paranormal, until me and my wife moved into our new home at the start of the year. We live in a nice area, the house isn't too old, and we're in Michigan. When we first moved in, there was absolutely no reason for us to believe that it was haunted. About 2 months went by and we started to experience things that could be written off as natural, I guess, such as lights turning on, electronics turning on or off, or curtains moving. We blamed it all on faulty electricity wiring or breezes, and didn't think too much of it, other than making a few jokes about it being haunted. Eventually, though, things escalated, and boy, did they escalate quickly. The first big encounter that we experienced was our bedroom door slamming shut while we were watching a movie downstairs, and it was loud enough to rattle the paintings on the living room wall, so of course we ran up to check what happened. When we opened the door, the bedding was off of our bed when it was originally tidy, and the curtain pole had fell off the window. We didn't think too much of this, as we believed that it fell off due to the door being slammed since our paintings rattled downstairs as well, but I thought it was worth a mention. Anyway, we got spooked by this obviously, and this would now happen regularly. It was never a different room too, always the main bedroom, the door being slammed during the day and at night, things being in places that we didn't leave them, pillows on the floor, etc. Before I mention this next part though, I just want to ensure that you know that my wife has never ever experienced sleep paralysis in her entire life, until one night in April where she woke up and saw a tall figure that resembled a human but wasn't. The figure didn't move. She described it as just standing still, watching in the corner of the room. This freaked her out enough that she woke me up and we both had to sit and watch a movie until she could feel comfortable enough to fall asleep again. Things didn't stop there though. They got more aggressive, I guess. We haven't been physically harmed, well, yet, but things would be thrown, paintings dropped off of the walls, pillows thrown across the room again, bottles of deodorant being slammed off of walls. It's to the point where I'm mentally drained of coming home from work and knowing that there's a huge mess to clean up when I get there. So, my question for all of you is, what can we do? What is this thing that is doing all of this, and why? I mean, our house isn't that old. I'd say the 60s or 70s. We live in a nice area, so why would it be haunted? I'm really hoping to get closure here, and I understand that most people won't believe anything that I've said, but we are so mentally drained at this point, and we can't afford to move, so I'm desperate. Please, if you can, help us. I fear that things are only going to get worse from this point too, and physical. Is this a warning? Is this just getting started? Anything. Any help, please. This happened in the early to mid-1980s. I was about 12 and had a group of friends that I hung out with regularly. I lived in Louisiana. There was this fad back then too to open these teen nightclubs. No alcohol, just disco music and the same vibe as the cocaine-induced frenzy of adult disco clubs, I guess. But anyway, one was opening up. My friends couldn't stop talking about it. I hate crowds, but I was a follower in my group, so in the end I agreed to go with everybody. One of our parents dropped us off. We paid our $2 to get in. I can see that it's super crowded, shoulder to shoulder. I just kind of hung out around the front door debating whether or not I was going to stay. After 10 or 15 minutes pass, I get this feeling like somebody is watching me. Just an eerie sort of creepy vibe. So I just start looking around. There's a lot of people, so it's a bit like a blur. Then I notice this middle-aged guy, short brown hair, striped collared shirt. He's just staring at me like maybe he knows me or something. Well, I knew that I didn't know him, and that was my cue to leave. It was about a 5-mile walk down a well-lit, semi-busy 2-lane highway, then right and another couple of miles down a 4-lane road into the subdivision. It's only about 8 p.m. and I don't have to be home till midnight, so I have time to walk it. So I take off walking, and I guess about halfway home, this car pulls up on the side of the road that I was crossing, and it's the same guy from the nightclub. My heart starts pounding out of my chest. I mean, he creeped me out when there was like around 200 people around. I was really creeped out on an isolated side street by myself now. But he yells at me and asks if I want to ride. And I mean, it's pretty far, but to heck with that. I said no, and I kept walking. Then he yells at me, "You want to make an easy $20? And I'm dumb. I stop and ask, "How?" He says, "Get in the car and I'll tell you." But nope, I just bolted. I took off, and I don't think I've ever run that fast in my entire life. I ran the last 3.5 miles full speed without stopping and without looking back. I made it home, ran inside the house, and straight to my room. I didn't even think to look back, since if he was following me, but if he came here, at least my dad was in the living room at this point. I never did tell anybody about what actually happened that night, but when I think back on it, I really think that I was one dumb move away from being on a milk carton, or maybe something worse. Almost 10 years ago, I was in a relationship with this guy, his name was Craig, who claimed that he had a spirit that had been following him around since early childhood. According to Craig, it never caused any physical harm. It just sort of clung to him and would occasionally reveal itself in bizarre ways. Craig's family was apparently very aware of this and believed it, claiming to have witnessed numerous bizarre occurrences over the years, all of which happened whenever Craig was around. Honestly, I didn't believe this for a second, not at all. And because I didn't believe it, it felt like a bit of a red flag. I mean, why would he make up something so random and bizarre and share it with me so out of the blue when nothing had warranted it? But being in my early 20s at the time, I just chose to ignore it, because he was great and seemed so normal otherwise. I suppose I eventually chose to believe that he genuinely believed it, which was preferable to the idea that he would maintain such a lie for so long just to unsettle me. Still, I pulled a Dennis Scully and reasoned that all the strange events that he had experienced throughout his life must have had reasonable explanations. Now, one night, Craig was staying over at my place. This was actually the first time that we'd ever spent an entire night together. We talked, made future plans, made out, and listened to music. Before we knew it, it was 2 a.m, and this was around the time that something really strange happened. We were both sitting on the floor of my bedroom, backs against the far wall opposite my bedroom door, looking for music videos to watch on my laptop, when 3 loud, fast knocks came from the door. I was so startled because it was extremely late, and the only other person present in the house at that time was my mum, who had gone to sleep hours ago and only ever got up to use the bathroom. She certainly never knocked on my door at such a late hour, especially if I had company over. I silently listened if I had imagined the knocks, because it was late and I was feeling pretty tired. But no, because when I had looked over at Craig, he was also looking at the door. This is the part where I imagine that a lot of listeners will probably decide that this story is fake, but hey, I'm going to stay true to my experience, so here it goes. So right before I'm about to call out to my mum, I hear a very angry male voice call my name, similar to how an angry father might shout at their child for breaking something valuable. It took Craig and I several minutes to finally muster up the courage to stand and creep over to the door. Before that, we comically stayed pressed against the wall, silently staring at the door and occasionally glancing at each other. I pressed my ear against the door and didn't hear anything, so I eventually opened it, but not before retrieving a golf club from my closet, and saw nothing. Just a normal dark hallway. Craig and I proceeded to check every spot in the house, even opening closet doors, and in the end we found nothing. While we did this though, I remember feeling like eyes were burning into me, as if someone was angrily watching and judging my every move. It had given me goosebumps, but because we didn't find anyone, I shrugged away that feeling. When Craig and I finally got into bed shortly after, I expressed feeling very creeped out, naturally. Craig, though, nonchalantly replied something to the effect of, "I told you, I have a spirit that follows me around." I had been really unnerved by this reply. He had said it a little too matter-of-factly for my liking. Anyway, fast forward several weeks when Craig is sleeping over at my place again. We were hanging out in the kitchen shortly after midnight when Craig received a call from his sister. He decided to step out into the backyard for the call. It's worth noting too that the backyard connected to the kitchen via a large sliding glass door, so I could see him at all times, so long as I remained in the kitchen and he stayed by that door. It's also worth noting too that the kitchen sink had a very large window directly above it, a window that looked out to the side of the house. I mention this because I decided to wash dishes while Craig took the call. While washing the dishes, I alternated between looking out the window in front of me and glancing to my right, where I could see Craig leaning against the glass door as he conversed with his sister. When I got to a particularly dirty dish, I stopped looking out of the window and to my right, so I could focus on getting the dish clean. When I achieved this, I looked back at the window and immediately took a couple of steps back, because standing right outside of the window was Craig, who was now smiling at me, and I don't mean an ordinary smile. I'm talking a highly exaggerated grin with lots of teeth showing, eyes blown wide open. If you've seen the recent horror movie Smile, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was very similar to that. After I collected myself, I laughed and shook my head at Craig, before gesturing at him to knock it off and come back inside. But he stayed completely motionless, eyes still burning into mine, his grin never faltering. He didn't even blink. After another 10 seconds or so went by, I began to feel very unsettled by this. Mind you, I had still been under the impression that he was just trying to make me feel uncomfortable via his version of a joke, so I was mostly unnerved that he would commit to the gag for so long, more than anything else, I guess. I certainly didn't consider it could be anything else, even after the previous incident. when out of nowhere, while I was still looking directly at Craig through the window, I heard the sliding glass door open to my right. When this happened, I looked away from the window and saw Craig coming back inside from the backyard. When I looked back at the window, the smiling Craig was now gone. Now, I want to make it crystal clear, unless Craig had secret teleportation powers I didn't know about, there was just no way that he could have moved from the window to the sliding glass door while I was staring right at him like that. It would have been impossible. When I told Craig what I had just experienced, he said, "I believe you. Something like that has happened before." Craig just grabbed my hand and led me to my bedroom, and I felt eyes burning into my back the whole way there. Up until Craig shut my bedroom door, that is. But even then, after we got into bed, I could still sense something standing on the other side of that door. We split up not long after this due to something unrelated. Believe it or not too, nothing strange has ever happened since. Almost a full decade later, and I haven't experienced anything. I never feel like I'm being watched, nor have I seen anything strange. But if you've listened this far, then thanks, and I would love to get some thoughts. I've had other bizarre experiences, all of which occurred prior to meeting Craig, but nothing that was ever so blatant, I guess. I'll admit that I'm still somewhat of a skeptic, but whenever I try to come up with a reasonable explanation for the experiences that I just mentioned, I always come up empty. I typically forget about these encounters, but this time of the year naturally brings the memories back, I guess, even though they happened at a completely different time of the year. In any case, if you do have some thoughts, then please share them in the comments below. When I, female and 33, was 20 years old, not too long after the 2007 housing crash, my family and I moved into a house in Martins Ferry, Ohio. It previously was a duplex that was converted into one sort of large house. It had 2 floors, 6 bedrooms, 4 on the second floor, 2 on the ground floor, 1 bathroom right next to my bedroom, and a very short basement. I couldn't stand up straight in it, and I'm 5'9". So I lived there with my 2 older brothers, A and E, 22 and 21, and little sister H, 13. Our rooms were on the second floor, as well as my mother and my stepfather, 52 and 45 respectively. I also have an older sister, D, 27. Now, I didn't come from a great home life, and eventually my stepfather was put in jail for DUIs and driving without a license. Everything was fine when we moved in though. We all had previously experienced paranormal activity in other homes that we lived in. This wasn't something unusual or frightening because we lived in an oldish city anyway. Other than seeing, hearing, smelling some weird things, nothing was outstandingly frightening. Dee lived with her husband at the time, along with their 2 small children. Her husband was financially abusive and was also an addict who got Dee addicted as well. And one day, Dee called me crying because her husband had spent all of her money on drugs, left her car on empty, and had left her alone at home with the children, and they had no food to eat. I spoke with my mother, and we came up with a game plan to get my sister out. I advised her to pack up everything she could fit in the car, pack up the kids, and meet me at the gas station. She lived a short 20-minute drive away across the river, and I met her at the gas station, and while I filled her car with gas, I hugged her as she cried. I bought her a pack of smokes, and we both drove back to the house. What we didn't know was that Dee was just starting into the worst few years of her addiction, and due to all of the negative energy, something dark seemed to have attached to her as well. The first thing that I remember was just how dreary the house felt after she had moved in. She eventually was fired from her job as a nurse because she had been caught stealing meds from her patients. She decided to get back with her husband, and he moved in because he couldn't afford their house payments due to spending all his money on drugs, and she also had a boyfriend that she was cheating on him with. It was a very tumultuous time because Dee is the type of person who thinks all other women are out to get her and steal her man. So she assumed that I was trying to sleep with her husband because I tried to be civil around him. I was engaged to someone else at the time, mind you, and after a day full of my sister trying to physically attack me, this is when this dark thing started to materialize. So at night, I would be in bed and feel like something was watching me. Anytime I was doing schoolwork, I felt like someone was standing behind me while I sat at my desk in my bedroom. It evolved into things in my room being moved around when nobody else was able to get into my room. Then my blankets would be pulled off in my sleep. Eventually, I started hearing someone walking around my room at night as well. Then the scratches started appearing. I would wake up with random scratches on my legs, on my back where I couldn't reach them. And one night I was grabbed by my leg and ripped off my bed by something that I wasn't able to see. Mind you, I am not a small woman by any means, so it would take someone quite strong to yank me that hard and that fast off of my bed in a dead weight, dead sleep like that. Another terrifying night, I heard it walk around the hallway outside of my bedroom. I lit some sage to cleanse my room and started chanting a protection spell over and over again for nearly half an hour. My fiancé Jay, 19 at the time, called me extremely upset, telling me that something was in his house outside of his room, growling, and he felt like he was going to be attacked if he left his room. The next day I went over to his house. He lived in a town that I grew up in where my sister and my whole family lived before we moved into this new house. And there were literal gouged scratches in his wooden door from where whatever it was had been waiting apparently. I asked him if I had left anything at his house within the last few days, and I looked around and saw my watch on the windowsill by his bed. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but something was telling me that whatever this thing was, it was now fixated on me. So I am a skeptical believer of these sorts of things, a doubting Thomas type, if you will. However, as a kid, I did used to see shadow people all the time and have heard strange things, i.e. what sounded like parents' voices calling me from downstairs, even though my parent was sitting right next to me upstairs. But when I was in college a few years back, I had a strange encounter in my dorm room. My roommate was in the room as well. It was late and I was sleeping soundly when I randomly woke up for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I sat up and at the foot of my bed, in the pitch dark, was a man. He was completely shadowy with glowing red eyes just sitting and staring at me. I remember locking eyes with him for a split second and sort of giving a weak scream. I instantly hid under my blankets, because that will protect you from supernatural entities, right? And waited a few moments before peeking out from beneath the blankets. And he was still there, staring at me. I don't remember what really happened after that, to be honest. I think I just fell back asleep with my head under the blankets. My roommate said that she didn't hear me scream or anything, so I really don't know what to think of it. Maybe hiding under the blankets does help after all. I talked to some of my friends about it though, and they said that I must have been dreaming, but I really don't think so. I mean, I felt wide awake after locking eyes with whatever that thing was. My heart was racing quickly too. But what was that thing? Was it the Hat Man that I've heard stories about? Has anyone else experienced this, or should I be concerned? Anyway, a few years later, this is completely unrelated, I think. I was visiting an old cemetery in Richmond, VA, and came across a grave covered with evil eye necklaces, rose quartz crystals, and the like. I was intrigued and went to take a closer look. There was a jar at the foot of the grave with a picture of a lady inside and a bunch of broken mirror shards. I really don't remember if I heard the whispering before or after I noticed the jar, but I remember hearing whispering near my ear, of like voices speaking rapidly. I was alone in this part of the cemetery, but my idiot self for some reason said, "Hello, anyone there?" and the whispering got closer. For some reason, and I don't really ever touch things in cemeteries, I felt really compelled to touch this jar, and stranger still, despite how terrifying this situation was, I couldn't bring myself to feel afraid. My brain was screaming for me to run, but my heart and body were just perfectly calm. In fact, in the end, I sort of had to force myself to run, and it felt like I was running in a dream almost. The grave had this sort of magnetism to it, and the air felt sort of pressurized as well. As I ran, my foot started hurting like I'd sprained it. It didn't stop hurting until I made it back to my car and eventually drove home. But my question for all of you is, what does a jar with broken mirror shards mean? I have asked my witchcraft practicing friends and they aren't sure. They just said that the situation was bad and dangerous and that I probably should just not go back there. But have any of you guys experienced anything like this, and what does this all mean? This happened to me when I was 4 years old. It's been 30 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. There were so many strange occurrences in this house, but this is the one that started everything. My entire family has lived in the same small SE Kansas town for like 4 generations now. My mother grew up there and moved away with her mother when she was around 15. A year later, she was involved in a very tragic car accident where she was the only one who survived. After waking up from a month-long coma, there was a lawsuit against the company who owned the other vehicle, and my mum won a large settlement. Shortly after the lawsuit, my mother was whisked back to the small Kansas town by her father. It wasn't long before my mother was back in high school, met my father, and was pregnant with me. By the time she was 17, she had married my father and graduated from high school. They bounced around from small house to apartment to small house again. In a town of 1,000 people, there isn't much to choose from. Eventually, they got sick of the roach-filled slums and they decided to use the money my mum had to buy a house. As with the rental side of things, houses were somewhat tough to come by as well. Most homes are family-owned and have been for decades, but they did find one house available for sale. The house that they settled on was a large 2-story home across the street from the high school. It was built in the 1800s when the streets in town were either dirt or brick. And as with any big, creepy old house next to a high school, people talked about it, but none of my parents' friends had ever actually been inside. When my mum viewed it, she found it to be absolutely beautiful. She insistently spent most of her settlement on the house and purchased it in her name alone. My mum, dad, and my 3-year-old self moved in shortly after. Less than a year later, my parents divorced and my dad moved out though. My mum and I ended up living here mostly alone for the next 9 years. I know that this is getting a bit long too, but it's important to understand the layout of the home for this, and almost all stories that happened here, so bear with me. So, you open the front door to a large staircase in the middle of the home. On the left was a small living room area, and on the right was a larger living room-esque space, bisected by what was once a double doorway, but the door was missing. The bathroom was under the stairs, which led to one downstairs bedroom. Spanning the back of the home was the kitchen and laundry room, which was clearly once a back porch. Upstairs was a bit strange, but the staircase was in the center of the house, which led almost all the way to the back of the home. At the top of the stairs, to the right, was a bedroom, mine, and to the left a long hallway. In the middle of the hallway was a door to another bedroom, Mum's, and at the end was a room that we called the balcony room. So, it was a cool fall night in 1994. My mum and I had been at a friend's house, Jaybird, that's what we called him anyway, for most of the evening listening to the Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana, or whatever edgy music was most popular back then. She was 21, into partying, dumber than a box of rocks, and had no problem dragging me along through all of her stuff. But that's another story. I remember, though, having a good time with all of her friends, and they usually treated me pretty well, so I had a good time hanging out late into the night with them. But around 2 or 3 in the morning, it was time for us to go home. We pulled into the driveway in front of the garage after a short 10-minute drive. The garage was about 100 feet from the back of the house, and we could see our bedroom lights shining through the large curtains in the upstairs windows. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or strange at all. We walked up the small path to the back door that led to the laundry room, both sort of yawning and ready to go to sleep. Once we got inside, the light from the large living room shined through the open doorway into the kitchen, lighting our way. We walked through the kitchen and into the living room, and that was when we heard it. Footsteps, somewhere inside of the house. We peered into the living room but couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Mum called out hello, but there was no response, just more footsteps. Mum and I made the trek to the front of the house, stopping near the foot of the stairs. The light from the living room bled over the bottom few stairs into the smaller living room on the other side. Unfortunately, the upstairs hallway light had been out since we moved in. That's why we typically left the bedroom lights on, by the way, so the light could bleed into the hallway. But looking up the staircase was looking up into complete darkness at this point. But someone had turned off the bedroom lights and was now running around upstairs. Mum called out again, "Hello, who's up there?" Of course, no response again. The footsteps were getting more intense though. Like most old houses, when something is dropped or someone is stomping on the floor, you pretty much feel it everywhere. We were starting to feel these steps, and they were now turning into stomps. One last time, my mum called out, "Who's running around up there?" and for a split second, the footsteps stopped. Then the stomping started, and I could feel the stomps walking down the hallway towards the top of the stairs. Then they started almost running down the staircase. My mum and I stood petrified, knowing whoever was running around in our home was about to reveal themselves by stepping into the light. I remember feeling them in the floor, getting closer with every stomp. The stomping stopped right at the foot of the stairs, but there was nothing there. It seemed like forever that Mum and I both stood there staring at the last step, but I'm sure it was only a second. Then, as quickly as it stopped, the stomping started again, back up the stairs, around the banister and down the hallway. Once we snapped out of it, Mum picked me up and ran back to the car. She backed out of the driveway and we went back to Jay's house, and once we got there, Mum told Jay what we had seen. "There's no way. Someone must be messing with you, Jen," he said. She begged him to come back to the house and to see it for himself, and eventually he agreed. We pulled up to the front of the house this time, not even bothering with the back door that we usually came through. I'm sure Mum expected us to open the door and everything to be completely normal. Jay would laugh at the situation and we'd take him home. I know I did anyway. But that's not what happened at all. Jay opened the door first and we all walked in. Standing at the foot of the stairs, just where Mum and I had been 20 minutes ago, we heard the same stomps as before. Instantly, Jay said, "Watch, we're going to go outside and find the ladder that they climbed up to get into your house. We'll pull it down and they'll have to reveal themselves." We went outside and found, of course, no ladder or any other way that someone could have broken in. We went back inside and it happened again. All the way to the bottom of the stairs again, right in front of Mum, Jay, and myself. Jay ushered us outside at this point and said, "How about you guys stay at my place tonight?" So we spent the night at Jay's house. The next morning we went back. The sunlight was shining in, illuminating the upstairs hallway. When we made it to the top of the stairs, everything was normal. Nothing was misplaced, no windows were broken or left open. Everything was exactly how we left it. This is one of the earliest childhood memories that I have. I was just a little guy back then, and I didn't really understand what had happened to me. I just knew that it wasn't normal. Little did I know that this was the first of many paranormal experiences in this home that I would have, and its history had much more to tell us. August this past year, my family stayed at an Airbnb in Purcellville, VA, 10 minutes outside of Harper's Ferry, look up the John Brown raid, and about 45 minutes away from Gettysburg. The house itself is older than the town, built in 1752 and on a current working farm vineyard. But here's the setup of the house. So, you enter into the oldest part of the home. You can see these two sections, kitchen and sitting room, where the original cabin before past owners built on. Through the sitting room was a small library, another sitting area, and my parents' room on the first floor but off the ground outside. When you go up the stairs of the sitting room, there's a bathroom to the right, 2 doors in front of the stairs, and a room to the left over the kitchen. My husband and I stayed in this room over the kitchen as the bedroom directly in front of the stairs gave me the creeps. It had the original fireplace in there, but something when I walked in just felt off. My sister and brother-in-law stayed on the floor above us, as that room has its own window and AC unit. The house has no communal AC, just individual in-room units. We arrived on a Sunday. So Monday morning, my dad asked me about footsteps from the night prior. He said that he was sitting at the kitchen table on his computer and could hear footsteps walking around the house above him. My dad had also been making jokes and tends to be a little theatrical with his humor, leading up to a vacation, calling it Ghost Central, so I told him that our room is above the kitchen and I wouldn't think anything of it. It was probably just one of us getting ready for bed or whatever. He then mentioned that he thought that he saw a bright light shining outside of his window and was tempted to look but thought better of it. Again though, my dad has also had a history of wild dreams and sleepwalking, so I just sort of brushed it off. Randomly too, my husband asked me to help him move the crib from the other side of our room to be next to our bed. I didn't think anything of it, as he said that it was just to be easier because our room was so big. It was half the full length of the original cabin with only our bed at the far end of the room, opposite from the crib and a bathroom. Anyway, on Tuesday, my dad's birthday, we sat in the old dining room for dinner. The room is a stunning, picturesque old farmhouse dining room with a big window overlooking the field, shed and barn, with the mountains around us too. It was still light outside, about 5 p.m. while we were eating, and I looked outside of the window and noticed the shed door seeming slightly ajar. I didn't think too much of it, but the next time I looked up, it looked more open, but slightly enough that I thought that I was just overthinking it. This then happened several more times. The door was more open, more closed, etc. I didn't want to scare my already anxious dad, so I texted my husband, "Can you go out and check the shed? The door keeps opening, I think." He checks his phone, and when we both look up, we watch the shed door slowly open itself completely, and then just as slowly closed itself shut again. My husband went outside with my dad to check it out, but in the end, nobody was there. We locked the shed and said that it shouldn't open again, but it was weird that the door would both open and close itself like that, right? Anyway, Wednesday we were gone for the day in DC, but on Thursday we went to Gettysburg for the day, and my husband left after dinner to put the baby to bed so I could do the ghost tour with my family. When we got home, my husband, who is naturally very skeptical of ghosts and hyperlogical about everything, said that he heard footsteps upstairs when he got in. Now, my dad and sister had met the groundskeeper on a walk along the property earlier in the week, and my husband said that he was worried the guy was a weirdo walking around the house and maybe snooping while we were gone. Another thing about the house too is that the sound doesn't travel at all. What I mean is that sitting in the kitchen, you didn't get an echo, or had to speak very loud and clear to someone in the next room. No acoustics, in other words. So he checked every room and closet to make sure that nobody was in the house. That's how loud the steps were, and he was a little spooked, but we decided not to say anything because my family was making comments all week about the house and we didn't want to upset anyone. That night, I thought that I was starting to get paranoid because I could have sworn that I was hearing a knocking above my head, and also thought that I was smelling vanilla. On the ghost tour, we learned that the townspeople dealt with the smell of corpses for months post-war by dipping face masks in vanilla, lavender, and mint. I thought that I was just spooked, and I did my best to sleep, but when I woke up the next morning, always the first because I have my routine with our daughter, I noticed that the kitchen cabinets were left open. I was confused, but just closed them, and while my daughter was taking a nap later that morning, I tapped her monitor and the camera rotated all the way down. That really confused me. Had I held it down, or am I just overthinking it? My family decided to spend the day in Leesburg as our last full day before we left Saturday. At lunch, I mentioned the cabinets, and my dad said that it might have been him. He got my mum a glass of water before bed apparently, but we all went to bed after him, so that didn't make any sense. Then, my sister mentioned that she woke up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. She said that she was having a really weird dream and thought that she heard someone whisper in her ear, "Don't move." She said that before bed, her and her husband were watching more videos about Gettysburg and saw a bright flash of light outside the window, so bright that she even checked the weather thinking that maybe there was a lightning storm on the way or something. Then I looked at my husband and said, "Did you tell them about the footsteps?" He hadn't. He shared his story and then said that he also woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat this morning. My sister also mentioned that she also hated the first bedroom. There was something about the fireplace that really creeped her out the same way it gave me the weird vibes. So in the end, we all decided to keep the door shut all week without saying anything to each other about it. We were all stunned, but my sister immediately started panicking, asking if we could leave. We were all on the fence about it. I mean, we were planning to leave Saturday at 6 a.m. regardless, to get home and to return to our rentals, but we weren't entirely convinced. We finished our day out, came home and began to pack up what we needed to, and then we went to dinner with the plan to stay one more night. And this is where everything got really weird. So when we got home from dinner, the bedroom door that we kept shut was actually cracked open, and then air was coming out of it that was so cold it was like standing directly in front of the AC. It was just my husband and I on the stairs, and we looked at each other, and he quickly shut it before my sister came up because, well, we didn't want her to freak out even more. We put the baby to bed, and I headed downstairs because we all talked about having one last fire pit outside. My husband stayed with the baby until she fell asleep, but when I came downstairs, my family was all huddled together saying, "We need to go." My sister was really scared and didn't want to stay another night in their room. After some discussion, we all decided that it'd be best to leave at this point. We were only like 3 hours from home and we could sleep in our own beds before midnight. We got the cars loaded up relatively quickly, and I had our daughter in her car seat and was talking with my sister, with the car door open as the boys all did a final walk through the house. From the outside, you can see perfectly who is where in the house too. I could see my dad walking into what was our room on the second floor with my husband, and I could see the flashlights scanning the top floor simultaneously where my sister and brother-in-law slept. My husband had his flashlight on when he went into the house, so I assumed that it was him up there. After a few minutes, my dad throws out some final trash, and I see him sort of half running or scuffling to the car, and he says, "Okay, time to go." We start heading down the driveway and turn to my husband and asked why he didn't just turn the lights on upstairs when he checked it. And he said that he wasn't up there, that it was my brother-in-law. My dad yelled up the stairs asking if brother-in-law was up there, and husband heard, "Yeah, I'm up here." At that point, my sister calls me. I ask her if brother-in-law was upstairs to do a final sweep, and he said no, he didn't go upstairs at all, and my dad, in their car, confirmed it. My dad said that he yelled up the stairs if he was there, and my brother-in-law apparently yelled from the first floor though, No, I'm in the kitchen. When everyone asked why, I told them what I saw, and it was like someone was walking around the third floor with a flashlight scanning the room. My dad mentioned that when he went into my room to check it, his flashlight started to die at that point, and when he stepped into the hallway, it came back on. My husband agreed and shared when he went into our room with my dad that he felt sort of suddenly numb as well. And while my dad was locking the house up on the keypad, he started the 4-digit code, and the house locked itself on the second number. And when he went to throw out the last of the trash, his flashlight started to die again, and that's when we all saw him shuffling to the car. Oh, and when we tried to find any information on this house, it's so old and historical that there's got to be something, right? But we found nothing, except the 2020 Zillow listing from the last owner, who literally had 6 packed paragraphs of information about the house. And under what the owner loves about the house is one sentence. The house was a Civil War field hospital, and then goes on to talk about the home's 66 acres and nearby locations. Needless to say, after all of that, we all felt better about coming home and not spending another night there. Sometimes I wonder if ghosts just get comfortable or familiar, and as more weird stuff happened leading up to the night that we left, I would not have been able to sleep that night. The owner texted my dad the next day to give check-out instructions, and my dad said that we left last night. I'm sure we're not the first to tell you this, but your place is haunted. The owners were surprised and said that we actually were the first to say so, and asked what we experienced and that it was a Civil War field hospital per Zillow. They simply said, well, it definitely has its history, and asked us to leave a review. In the end, we didn't. When I was in high school, I had a really strange encounter riding my bike home from work one day. So when I was a senior in high school, I worked at a Target store from about 4 p.m. until about 10 p.m., 4 or 5 nights a week. After helping close the store, Z out the registers and other final closing tasks, my coworkers and I were usually out of the building and on our way home before 10:30 p.m. The store was not too far from a bike path that also went close to my home. It took me about 15 to 20 minutes to ride my bike home from work, down a sort of small bike path and into a large subdivision. At about the midway point home, there was a section of the bike trail that went through an undeveloped field and was very poorly lit. I remember I was slowing down to change the radio station on my CD or Walkman or sort of radio thing. Yes, I'm dating myself here a bit. When suddenly, I see a dark figure about maybe 100 feet or 30 meters away from me on my right start running at me from the dark field. Fight or flight instantly kicked in, and I started riding my 18-speed mountain bike so fast that I felt like I could have qualified for the Tour de France. As I was escaping, I took a quick peek back and I saw a guy in black, fully black, with a ski mask and everything, attempting to chase after me for a few moments. Needless to say, what was normally a 15 to 20-minute bike ride turned into a 5-minute top speed and top gear bike ride home. I also obviously didn't sleep well that night, but I still occasionally think about that encounter in my darker moments. I was told this story about 16 years ago by my mother, so I may make some mistakes, but what I remember is true, and it's still extremely freaky. This happened in St. Kilda in the early 80s. My mum may have been 20 or 21, and she lived in an apartment complex where you had to ring a buzzer and talk to someone to be let into the complex. In case you didn't know, at Kilda, it isn't exactly the best area in Melbourne to live. There's a lot of junkies and criminals reside around the suburbs, and they congregate at St. Kilda Pier. In the 90s, I remember warnings of not walking through the sand in the beaches due to syringes being left in there. We had a real heroin epidemic at the time, and AIDS was a death sentence too. But anyway, at around 2 a.m, Mum is in bed asleep. Then all of a sudden, she hears this blood-curdling scream from a woman in the streets below. She wakes up, dials 000 to tell the police what she heard, and for them to come as soon as possible. 5 minutes go by and 2 men are ringing the buzzer saying, "Police here, let us in, so we can get a statement." My mum was about to buzz them in until she all of a sudden had a really bad gut feeling and decided to ask questions such as, how did the police get here so quickly? Why aren't there any flashing lights? Where was the ambulance? So she called her friend who lived on the floor below, telling her that something just didn't seem right. At the same time, they were constantly buzzing and refused to give their badge numbers. So she rang the St. Kilda Police Department and said, "Your officers are here already?" The sheriff said that the police were tending to other matters though, and that they'll maybe be half an hour away. He also told her not to let those people in as they were not his men. So Mum went down to her friend's place as she didn't feel safe in her own place anymore. 40 minutes later, 2 police officers rang the buzzer, introducing themselves as Constable and Senior Constable, with badge numbers being and apologizing for being late, and asking if they could come in. My mum's friend now and my mum too could see a police car with sirens and an ambulance as well. So they let the police in and the police take a statement. They let them know that detectives are investigating the vicinity and will let them know if the police require them to come into the station for further questioning. The police then leave, and crime scene tape is wrapped around the area, which Mum discovers the next morning. Being absolutely terrified, Mum decides to stay at her friend's place and barely sleeps that night. And the detectives, they discover a body about 20 meters away from the apartment complex. The victim was a young woman in her early 20s, just coming back home. She was stabbed several times. I don't know whether they even found the criminals, but what I have learned is never to go home alone at night, to always trust your gut. Also, don't believe people at their word without evidence. It terrifies me to think about what could have happened to my mum that night had she buzzed those 2 men in. So, I have a bunch of paranormal stories, but this one was my first. In 2003, I was a part of the invasion of Iraq. The platoon that I was a part of was tasked with guarding a salt factory. We were there to stop looting, and additionally, behind the factory were 2 mass graves and about 20 destroyed Republican guard vehicles. Well, we set up a day and night shift with 4 guard positions that we would rotate through every 2 hours. The first position was at the entrance gate in a shed, 2 positions on the side of the building in vehicles, and the last one on the roof looking over the graves and the vehicles. I was up on the roof after midnight pulling my shift. I was up there with a machine gun, my rifle, body armor, and helmet with night vision goggles, NVGs. The roof is flat with 1 door in the corner with a huge water tank for the building. There's really only one way up and down from the roof, and that was through the 1 door. I'm sitting up there in my chair when, all of a sudden, someone slaps me on the back of my head. I mean, I felt and heard a skin-on-skin slap, so I stand up and say, "All right, I wasn't sleeping." But when I did, there was nobody there. That's when I realized that it was skin on skin and I was still wearing a helmet, which means that there's no way that someone could have touched me there. I looked around with my night vision goggles and I don't see anything. There was no place for someone to hide or run fast enough to get to the door. I pulled my night vision goggles off and that was when I saw it. There was a blue orb, maybe about the size of a volleyball, hovering 10 feet from me. Then it shot towards the doorway. I slowly go back to my seat and stare off into the night, wondering what the heck that was. Eventually, though, my time is up and I swap spots with my buddy Matt. And not even 15 minutes in, Matty comes running down the stairs screaming about there being something on the roof. He says that he was looking out with his NVGs when something grabbed his wrist and jerked him out of his hand forcefully. He said all that he saw was a floating blue orb, and then he ran for the door. I told him what happened to me, and he started screaming that the place is haunted and that he would never go up there again. Matty, he's a man of his word too, and he never did go back up there. He even slept in our vehicles outside in the heat of Baghdad. We ended up leaving that place a week later, never to return, but it's something that just has always stuck with me. So I'll try to keep this brief, although it's a lot of information. But these are my experiences from a case that I've been working in my role as a chaplain and demonologist for the Order of St. John. You may remember some of my stories from before, but if you're a skeptic, this definitely won't convince you, nor is it an attempt to do so. Also, I'm not embellishing details very well, so feel free to ask me some questions in the comments below if you would like. So before my visit, I was given a referral by our regional chaplain. They're responsible for ministry and chaplaincy support with a large area of the city. Chaplains are a community-placed role, whereas pastors and ministers work in churches, and typically priests work in an abbey or monastery, in our denomination at least. I used to be a pastor myself, but now I'm a chaplain in the community. I'm an area chaplain, which means that I'm responsible for a handful of suburbs and any of the Order of St. John staff who work or live in these suburbs. The referral that I was given was from within my area too. I needed to go and check out a forest that someone had reported creepy things going on in, which included strange noises, feelings of being watched, and also strange signs. The community member also reported that they always had nightmares and a bad sleep after visiting the forest, but didn't put this together for a little while. It's a nice forest too, small and on the edge of suburbia. It's secluded, so it's great for walking dogs and whatnot. So naturally, I took my dog, and I always take a blessed Taiaha with me. On my first visit, I found some strange things though, and heard some strange things too. I found a bird with a broken neck next to a bag of rotting meat, opposite a small candle shrine in the forest. To me, this was a clear indicator of something human going on, although my job is to try and disprove the paranormal, but I have to admit that this immediately put me in the concerned camp. I continued to walk and found 2 more dead animals. One was a native eel that had its head cleanly cut off, and the other was a dead hedgehog that had sadly been bludgeoned to the point that it was flat. My first assumptions were psychotic teens, homeless person, or attempted dark magic. There are also some strange markings painted on the trees on the path as well, which was noteworthy, but I also noted that there was no wildlife noises present. But we are in a change of seasons here, so pressure drops are common at that moment. However, I performed a blessing, which includes singing, and the birds were singing by the time that I finished. I took the rotting meat and I threw it in the bin. On my second visit, for this visit, I came back armed with a Bible, a small wooden cross, and my uniform. Blessings are often not a one-and-done resolution. You need to bless something multiple times, and blessings are one of our most misunderstood tools. They're a security blanket, not a conflict resolution sort of thing. But this visit is when things sunk in for me. I found large drag marks around the forest, many of which ended at a small shrine area where I had found the dead bird. This visit is also when I started to hear murmuring in the forest that was just barely audible. I also started to experience large movement around me, with one inexplicable movement in a shallow stream. The stream is about 15 centimeters deep, but something splashed in it, sent the water about a meter into the air. It was just really strange. I also felt this niggling pressure on the back of my neck and back ribs. but this could have also been anxiety-driven muscle tension, I admit. I walked through the forest with my cross drawn and prayed a small exorcism invocation whenever it felt appropriate, just to be safe. Now my third visit, this was the hardest one. When I arrived, the whole forest smelt horribly of death because of all the dead animals. I assume that there are some that I missed, but I certainly found more. A decapitated rat, birds, mice. This time, I had brought my prayer book of St. Martin to consecrate the area. When I entered the forest, it sounded as though people were using the track, so I kept the dog on the lead. But I never found anyone. The talking always seemed to be around a corner almost, and just indistinguishable. When I began the prayer, I immediately started to vomit uncontrollably, and this sickly sweet smell of death became unbearable. But I pushed through. I also constantly heard the movement of something large in the forest at this point. I kept praying and vomiting until I finished the consecration, and then the vomiting stopped. The smell of death also disappeared, and I did the prayer again to be safe and didn't vomit this time. On my fourth visit, I returned, and the animals were either gone or had decomposed. The smell had also gone completely. There were still some strange noises and movements within the forest and the water. We don't have large wildlife here, so the noises are strange to say the least. But other than that, things seemed to be coming right. I still felt stalked and still heard murmuring, but the activity absolutely seems to have lessened. I do need to go back and pick up all the rubbish that has accumulated, bless it again, and fix the markings, so wish me luck and I'll report back after I've done this. I live on a 13-acre property in an area of my state where the suburbs turn to rural farmland. My parents live in the main house near our road, while my fiancé and I converted one of the barns on the back half of the property into our house. Our house and another barn are set in a pretty wide clearing pasture, but beyond that, we're surrounded by woods on 3 sides. All of this is to say that we don't get many visitors out here. From the time that we moved into the house almost a year ago, there have been some occasions where I get this inexplicable feeling of terror while outside at night. I've lived in the woods my whole life, including in places far, far more remote than this, but I've never had this feeling before. The woods, they're really home for me. In every other place that I've lived, they've felt like my woods, but not here. I've repeatedly had the feeling that I'm trespassing on somebody else's land, someone who isn't happy to have me here. Anyway, the other night I took my dog out for his last walk. It was 11 p.m, so it was pitch black outside the ring of light cast by the floodlights on the side of the house. As I was walking towards the edge of the tree line where my pup likes to do his business, I heard a sound like someone imitating the hoot of an owl coming from the direction of the other barn, maybe about 30 yards away to our right. I was so certain, though, that it was a human making the noise that I called out, "Ha ha, very funny, Dad." I assumed that it was my father closing up the barn for the night, and that he was taking the opportunity to try and spook me, but nobody called back. It was at this point that my dog lifted his head from sniffing all over and froze, staring in the direction of the barn. His hair stood up along his spine and he started to give a low, menacing growl. Now, this dog is obsessed with all people and animals for that matter. Everyone is a friend waiting to be made. I've really never seen him act aggressively toward anything, even other dogs that have tried to fight him. My dad especially is his favorite person on the planet, so there's no way that he could have started growling at him. It was my turn for all the hair on my neck to stand up as a cold wave of fear hit me like a brick. My dog had stopped right at the edge where the light met the darkness of the woods. Normally, the light gradually dissipated into the trees, still providing enough visibility to see the outline of trees and shrubs and whatnot. But this time, it just ended with a solid wall of black. I've never seen anything like this. It was not natural, that much is for certain. When suddenly, I heard the same fake owl sound from maybe only a few feet away, just on the other side of that darkness. My dog jumped and immediately started barking, putting himself between me and this sound. He's only a little guy though, so I darted forward, scooping him up, and took off running toward the house. And behind me, I heard the sound again, but this time it had a sort of strange warble to it, almost like, I don't know, almost like laughter. Anyway, I got inside, I locked the door, and I didn't go back out again that night. The next morning, though, when I went out to check on the barn, I found the doors had been partially broken off the slide and were swung past each other the wrong direction, like someone had tried to force them open the wrong way or something. There were no signs of footprints in the dust or dirt or anything, or any other signs of any intruder. We didn't have any crazy wind or anything that night, so I have no idea how this happened. I also have no idea what was out there that night, but suffice it to say, my dog and I will stay well within the floodlights when we go out after dark now. So the backstory to this is that my mum had died in 2019 of a sudden illness. I'm living in the house that we used to live in together, and I'm in a fresh relationship, so everything is kind of new. Point is, one morning I noticed the first 3 letters of my name spelled out on top of a dusty shelf, as if someone had drawn it with their fingertips. It's not a smudge at all, since the dust is really thick and the letters are very clear as well. At first, I really didn't think much of it, since I thought that it was just my girlfriend being quirky. But today we were cleaning up, and I noticed my name written in dust on a lower shelf too. I checked the upper shelf, and now it was not only 3 letters, but my full first name. The first letters appeared right next to where I keep my tarot cards, and the second one appeared where I usually light incense. We asked mutual friends as well as anyone who has been upstairs in the past month, and nobody owned up to it. And now that I think about it too, it is very oddly specific to just write someone's name in dust twice like that. I've tried coming up with logical explanations, but frankly, at this point, I'm just at a bit of a loss. We do not want any spirits of any sort in the house, so I'm hoping that there's something obvious that I just haven't noticed yet. I'm not a spirits kind of guy, and to be honest, I would feel weird to live with the feeling that the ghost of my mother could be lurking over me while I'm watching Top Gear or something. But again, I just really don't have an explanation for how my name could have ended up in the places where it has. So this happened to me when I lived with a flatmate and worked nights, and it is still the strangest thing that I've ever seen. So this one night, I came back home at around 2:30 in the morning, and since my flatmate worked as ground staff and her shifts rotated every week, she was supposed to be home at around 6:30 in the morning. I had a private balcony, and because it was winter, I kept it closed or my room would be freezing. I lived in a place that can get 2 or 1 degrees during winter, but that's it. So there was never really any heating system in the house, but we had room heaters, so we just kept the door shut. And when I got home, it was odd that it was open, since I remembered closing it before leaving for work, but chalked it up to my flatmate. I closed the open door to this balcony, turned off the light outside, and got into my usual routine of taking a bath and changing for bed. It was around 3 in the morning by then, and when I hit the pillow, I fell asleep pretty quickly. Now, this was out of the ordinary for me, since It always takes me a good hour to fall asleep once in bed. I didn't remember falling asleep either, but I woke up maybe an hour later as I was really cold and saw that the door to the balcony was open again and the lights were back on. I remembered closing it and turning the lights off very clearly though. From my bed, I sort of had a bit of a diagonal view to the balcony so I can see anyone who may be standing there. And just as I was about to get out of bed, I saw something move out of the shadows where I couldn't see and into the light. And it was me. And I climbed onto the steel railings. Once on top, I or she turned her neck to look back directly at me and smiled a little too wide for a human. She also had too many teeth, but then she just jumped off the balcony down into the fog. I was frozen. Not that I couldn't move, but more like I was just completely shocked. I got up from bed shakily after a couple of minutes, freaked out of my mind, closed the door, and turned off the lights outside again. I sat there dumbfounded and I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I still don't understand what I saw to this day, but it always inspires a chill down my back when I think back on it. I haven't seen me or her again since then, and I hope that I'm not going crazy. So this happened in Norway, and it took place around 2003. I appreciate any comment that can shed some light over what happened as well. Some information first. I'm from Oslo City, but when I was a teenager, we moved to a bit more remote place about 30 minutes outside the city. It was mostly houses and woods, moose, badgers, foxes, wolves and lynx around, but also lots of roe deers, who are really used to humans. There's no farms and stables in the nearby area, no homeless people, and the teens who snuck out usually hung around the mall to steal fresh delivered Napoleon cake from the bakery's loading dock. We lived quite central to a mall and a school and such. There was also a small forest behind our house, maybe a 5-kilometer radius. And one summer, 2 friends and I went camping for one night in small said forest. We were 14 and 15-year-old girls, and there was a bonfire place about maybe 100 meters from my house where we put up a tent. The ground is packed tight and has this sort of hollow sound when you walk on it. The tent was big for us. It was made for 3 and kind of round, so it would be hard for someone to reach the top without collapsing on the tent wall. And it was an old tent as well, so the fabric was a little bit old at this point, sort of fraying at the edges. It didn't rain that night, and we didn't bring any food or food equipment, except for some candy that we had inside the tent. We sat there gossiping and eating candy until midnight, and when we tried to go to sleep, we heard hooves walking beside the tent. We laid still listening, pretty sure that there were curious roe deer outside, but it was also this sort of, like a rattling sound of metal that seemed weird. Not like tin cans, and I know that this is going to sound weird, but just like a knight armor would sound from the movies. Suddenly it started to blow up with strong wind, and we started talking to sort of ease the atmosphere a bit. The hooves and the metal sound reminded me of a knight on a horse, and then my friend said, "That sounds like 2 knights." We brushed it off as roe deers, but we never really heard them leave. We kept talking when suddenly the wind or something ripped open a huge gash in the middle of the tent roof, right above us. And then a strong light, which I can only describe as sort of like lightning, came through the opening. We screamed, and suddenly the wind stopped and the light disappeared as quickly as it came. We sat there in shock and didn't hear anything around us anymore. In fact, it was dead silent. No sounds of footsteps or hooves, no sound of helicopters or anything like that. In fact, all the wildlife had gone completely silent all of a sudden. We just looked at each other. We panicked, got out of our tent, and we ran to my place for the rest of the night. We went back the next morning and we took down the tent and looked around, but we found nothing that could help us figure out what the heck happened that night. Now, we don't drink or do drugs or anything. My parents were asleep when we got home, so it couldn't have been them messing with us. Plus, given how silent it was, I think we would have heard someone if they had run away after doing everything that happened. I've been around this little forest in my teens for a long time, and I've never experienced anything weird like this before or afterward. In the aftermath, we nervously landed on some kind of rare lighting and roe deers with one foot in a metal can, but to be honest, I don't think either of us really believe that. Bear with me because this will be a bit long, but I feel like something is happening and I'm going crazy for thinking it, but I experienced this firsthand, and it's happening again. 10 years ago, I was dating this guy who owned about 300 acres of ranch land, had cattle on it too. One night, we were out there having a little country-style date, blankets and a picnic. It's about midnight-ish. We hear drumming all of a sudden, and at first we thought someone was driving by on the highway and had an insane bass system. But then the screaming started. We were getting spooked, but naturally wanted to find out what it was. We got up, got in the truck, and the second that we started it, the drumming and the screaming ceased. We did a patrol, checking out everything. Nothing was out of place. Cameras were normal. Nothing creepy on them or anything. Just a couple of cows and the donkey. The gates to all entrances were locked and there was no disturbed earth anywhere from vehicles, so in the end we just left. But a couple of days later, we're out doing a feed and count and we notice a cow and her new calf are missing. We load up a gator and ride out looking. Started in the west pasture and made our way east. Towards the east pasture, there are sinkholes and a couple of cave entrances that the animals generally stay away from, other than the donkey, that is. We get towards the northeast area where there's more brush, and the first thing that we notice is that it's quiet. Like, you ever been in a church or a school when nobody's there? That sort of eerie, oppressive feeling like there's a bunch of eyes on you, but nobody's there. It was very much like that. Then we noticed the smell. It smelled like a hospital mixed with a ton of ozone. Extremely clean, but this is out in the country. We got off the gator, grabbed the weapons, and headed into the brush. The ground was damp, only one set of footprints in. We found her tracks, but where's the baby? We go further and stumble upon 68, and we found that she was missing her tongue, her udders, and reproductive organs. They were all gone. All the areas looked almost cauterized. There was no blood, no stench, no insects, no scavengers, nothing. I was very much like, what the heck? Whereas my ex just went, not again. And I was like, excuse you? What do you mean not again? According to him, 10 years prior to this, it had happened before. They found another cow that had calved, and it was dead. Never found her calf. They reported it to the authorities, but nothing ever came of it. We marked the location, then head up to the front to make a call. Mind you, we're on the back section of the pasture and we have multiple fenced-off sections, 2 that are unused, and that's due to sinkholes and caves along with a lot of brush. We get to the second fenced-off area, about 150 acres from where we found 68, and all of a sudden, I hear the calf. She was in the fenced-in area. I crawl under the barbed wire, scoop her up, and we brought her home. Other than being hungry and a little dirty, she was perfectly fine. When we got home, I made a joke that watch in another 10 years it's going to be time for another sacrifice. It's been a decade and we've been broken up for a while, but recently an article popped up and it triggered the memory when I saw the location. Cattle being found dead. Same description and the same area. I feel like I need to investigate this further, but to be honest, I'm a little bit hesitant because I'm scared of what I may encounter. This happened in June of 2014. I'm a female, was 20 at the time, and just about to move out of my parents' house 2 weeks later to my first apartment in the city. It was a Wednesday morning around 10 in the morning. I was on summer vacation and off from work that day, so I was still in bed. My parents had left for work earlier and I was home alone. Back then, my room was in the basement and my window was right next to the stairs leading to the front door. I was woken up by the sound of someone walking up the stairs and thought that it was odd, so I got up, took my phone, and went upstairs to try and get a better look at who this could be. Once upstairs, I saw from the kitchen window there was a man leaving our front yard and going back to the sidewalk. I was relieved and thought that it was probably just somebody selling stuff. But then the man turned around, went back onto our front yard, and started walking toward the right side of the house, where there was a door leading to the kitchen. This is where I was standing. The man knocked and he asked if there was somebody home. Looking back, I should have said yes through the window, but I was just so scared and confused, I didn't say anything. He then walked back to the front yard and back onto the sidewalk and started walking away. Again, I was relieved and I told myself that maybe it was a friend of my dad's that I didn't know and that he was looking for him. But this just didn't seem right. I was trying to find any reason for this man to be here other than wanting to break in. And just when I thought the man had left, I saw him come back and walk to the left side of the house towards the backyard. Now, I was really scared, and I knew that he wanted to get in. I went to the front door, unlocked it, and waited for a couple of seconds. And it was then that I started to hear something cutting the screen off my parents' bedroom window, and at that point, I was shaking. I opened the front door quietly, ran out of the house and called 911. 2 minutes later, a team of police were there, but unfortunately the guy had run away and they never caught him. Needless to say, I was pretty terrified my first 3 months alone in my first apartment. In 2021, I took a part-time job at a corporate wedding venue in the Rockies. The venue is a beautiful old house on a farm property, picturesque mountain, farm, Victorian sort of stuff. During my first shift, I'm given a tour of the underbelly of the house, where linens and laundry were stored. They had gutted the basement to make a huge laundry facility. It had lots of fabric hanging everywhere, industrial machinery, long corridors, perfect nope material. We'll come back to that area in a minute. But after the tour, we went upstairs to this gorgeous Victorian mansion and started to set up the kitchen for the bridesmaids area. As we make small talk, the banquet lead stops me and says, "Hey, before they get here, I just want to warn you about some creepy things, if you believe in that stuff." She continues when I tell her, definitely believe in that stuff. Well, there are a set of twins buried on the property and they haunt the grounds. I live in the carriage house and I've worked here for a few years and I've seen a lot of stuff. She has 3 giant dogs who are allowed to follow us on the property around until guests arrive, and she proceeds to tell me all these stories about her dogs being spooked at weird hours of the night, and the occurrences had been especially bad lately. To be honest, I thought that it was just playful hazing, but her serious tone was too chilling to be a joke. I asked her if I would ever have to lock up alone. She replied with, no. That's why they offer to let the banquet leads live on the property who aren't scared of ghosts. People often quit if they have to close alone. So, fast forward to post-wedding cleanup. I'm cleaning the kitchen in the old house, and my banquet lead tells me that she's going to lock up dining hall outside and be right back. I was honestly so tired that I wasn't even thinking about those ghost twins roaming around. I had let my guard down, I guess, and the house was quiet and the ambience was just lovely. At around 2:30 in the morning, I even started thinking how magical it must have been to live here, to enjoy the ambience night after night like this. When out of nowhere, the door from the staff kitchen to the main dining area suddenly just slammed closed. I dropped what I was holding and bolted to my lead, closing the dining hall. I could see her through the window the entire time, and nobody else was on the property. So it was out of literal nowhere, and there was nobody here that could have done it. I would have seen them if they had. I was terrified. She saw the look on my face and said, "Already?" Like she had seen this a million times. She asked me if I wanted to finish the laundry instead, and I shakily said okay, only because it was post-COVID and I needed money so bad. I didn't want to go back down there, but we had to finish at least getting the laundry started. Terrified and poor, I rolled to the washing machines with my big roller cart full of dirty tablecloths, and shortly after my banquet manager came down to help me load them. We started to load two separate machines, and out of nowhere, we hear what sounds like rustling in the rolling laundry cart behind us, like someone was in it rolling around. The wheels were squeaking in the most unnerving way. My banquet lead turns slowly and quietly towards me and says, let's leave these for tonight. I'll get up early and finish them in the morning. I don't know how to describe the level of fear that I think we both felt in that moment. She had said that it had been getting worse earlier, and in that moment, this tough-as-nails manager, I think it hit her breaking point of being scared. We had reached the apex of scary experiences this employee had seen, and it was on my first night. After trying to finish as much non-house related work as we could, we clocked out and I tried to laugh it all off. Her dogs had been helping us feel safe after the laundry incident, but I don't know how she lived there full time, to be honest. I hated every shift so much that eventually I just quit after a month. No other occurrences happened to me after that night, only because I told them that I couldn't close anymore due to my day job. It was actually because of the ghost twins, but it was really frightening stuff, and I definitely spent some time cleansing myself after that experience. When I was younger, around 2004 I think, we used to sneak down through a quiet area of scrub, over the dunes and onto the beach to smoke some weed. I lived in a very small coastal town on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Typical wildlife was possums, wallabies, and maybe the occasional kangaroo. Definitely no dingoes, crocs, or other apex predators around. But one night, as we quietly made our way down the path, we sort of noticed a shuffling and rustling sound in the undergrowth near the path. We stopped moving, and the sound seemed to stop as well. There was absolutely zero light except from some houses in the distance and the moon that night. After a brief pause, we decided to keep moving, but we heard the rustling sound again, and this time noticed some bushes moving too. We stopped, and my friend whispered, "Dude, did anyone else see the trees move?" I whispered back, I only saw the bushes move." We stood there, frozen, for a few beats, and in my head I was weighing up the option to either continue on the path, or perhaps just leg it back home. We took a few steps forward though, when we heard the sound like leaves crunching underfoot. At this point, I reached out and grabbed my friend's hand, thinking that maybe we were being followed by someone. It was right then too that I noticed that I could smell something absolutely awful. "What the hell is that smell?" my mate whispered. His voice came out so small that it frightened me even more. We stood there for a long time, maybe about a minute or two, until we heard a very low groan or growl sound coming from a few meters away. Now, brush-tail possums are quite common in this area and are known to make a sort of grunting or coughing sound, but they are, the ones that I've heard anyway, distinctly higher pitched and more chirpy sounding than what we heard. This, whatever it was very low, and it had a sort of a strange catching tisk sound at the end. Needless to say, we wordlessly booked it straight back up the path that we came from. It sounded to me, though, like a huge commotion of leaves crunching and branches shaking and crashing behind us as we began to run. But reflecting on it with my adult hindsight, it definitely could have been us making all that noise. I don't know. It was strange to say the least, and the more I think about it, the more it just doesn't make sense that it was a possum. We never did go back to that spot again, and we would often bring it up from time to time, trying to speculate what could have followed us that night. Our best theories is that it was just a really big possum, or perhaps a person trying to scare us. The biggest issue, though, that we would argue over is, why would a possum follow us, let alone down on the ground? Although my mate says that he saw the tree branches move as well. And if it was a person, how did they make that sound? And what was that smell all about? And also, why didn't we hear any footfall? Maybe it was just a coincidence of events, I don't know, but a person following us, a nearby possum growling, and maybe a nearby dead animal stink wafting over at just the right moment. Whatever the case, it still makes me shiver to think about it now. This story has always scared me. I was about 20 and my brother was about 18. I used to drive a 97 Chrysler. I mention this because it was a cute convertible. It was black with pink and purple flames and totally looked like a girl's car. My brother used to have long black hair and I have long blonde hair. But we were headed to our friend's place at around 8 p.m. and pulled into the Circle K to get gas. We lived in a big city, so there was nothing sketchy about it. I mean, we'd done this 100 times before. Someone approached us, though, from behind as I put in gas. The dude saw two long-haired people in a car that looked like it belonged to a girl. He approached me and my brother opened the passenger door. Dude was surprised when a 6-foot man got out of the car. He then said, "Hey, my girlfriend's in the hospital. It's a mile down the road. I just need a ride." We grew up in the area and I told my brother under my breath, "Man, there is no hospital where he's saying." We told him that we couldn't take him and he then pulled a steak knife out of his waistband, kept telling us, "I just need a ride." And I remember my brother stepping in front of me and telling the guy to put the knife down. It was probably 30 seconds of conversation, but man, it felt like forever. The guy started talking to himself, waving the knife around, and then just literally walked away. We got back in the car, got to our friend's house. It was 2 minutes from the gas station, of course, and then called our parents who came to our friend's place and they told us to call the cops. But here's the kicker. We called the cops and explained what happened, and they found the guy in the neighboring parking lot, sleeping, and they told us that they couldn't do anything because he was currently not being violent and they didn't have any evidence other than our word. My mother almost lost her mind talking to this cop. It's whatever in the long run. I mean, we were safe and that's really all that matters, but still, the fact that the cops didn't go and take the footage from the cameras of that place, it still blows my mind. This happened a few years ago, and it still rattles me when I think about it. For context, I'm a female, and at the time was around 25 years old. I worked in an office of around 150 people, and one day I received an email from a coworker, but I didn't recognize his name. The email basically said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry if I did something to offend you. Given the situation, if you'd prefer to never see me again, I understand and will avoid you in the kitchen." I was extremely perplexed as I had no idea who this guy was, but I must have done something to offend this person, right? I responded back along the lines of, "I'm sorry if I offended you. Sometimes I zone out and it can be perceived as if I'm rude, so I apologize." After this response, though, he started getting irritated, basically denying my apology and acting all passive-aggressive about it. I wish that I would have kept a screenshot of these emails, but basically, he was confusing the heck out of me with this misunderstanding, so I sent him a message suggesting that we resolve this in person. That was a big mistake. He agrees to meet in the kitchen in the office. I go there and I immediately see a tall, 30-ish-year-old guy who I've seen around but never met before. I explained to him that I apologize, but I truthfully have no idea who he is. I've never even really met him before and don't want any issues. What happens after, though, made me very concerned. His face flushed bright red, and he looked visibly angry. He was stuttering and denying that I didn't know who he was, and then he says, "You've been staring at me for months. When you made eye contact with me, you gasped and ran away." And I mean, what the heck, right? I strongly denied this and told him that it was a mistake. He kept insisting that I've been staring at him for months and he could always see me doing it. Eventually, I realized that he couldn't see reason and I just decided to end the conversation. Upon reflection, I realized that it's possible that he thought that I was staring at him because when you walk in the hallway next to the kitchen, there's a room with glass at the end where a bench of desks are. His desk would be right in line of sight if I was walking down the hallway, and he had a funny sticker on his desk I would sometimes look at. But this seems like a huge stretch. Anyway, after this incident, a coworker pulls me over and asks me why I was talking to him. I explained the situation and she looked scared and told me that last year he appeared in the office in a bathrobe, raving like a madman, and apparently he wasn't fired, but it was bizarre to say the least. So, was I dealing with someone in the midst of psychosis? Was he dangerous? No clue, but I reported this ASAP to my manager, who took it seriously enough to tell his manager. I don't think that he works there anymore. Thankfully, I left this company 2 weeks later, but I was extra cautious to not go anywhere near this dude. I was never going to share this, but I happened across a story the other day that really shook me, and I guess that I'm just hoping for more information. This happened a few months ago. I live in Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee, so still pretty urban, suburban, but we got quite a few Bigfoot believers up north. I'm currently living alone in my old childhood house. There's miles of woods behind it, and I played in them alone all the time from a truly inappropriately young age to right up into my teens. Nothing overly weird, but I'm old enough now that I like to pre-game bedtime with an evening nap, mostly to keep from saying that I'm going to bed at 7, but I'll get up a little from 10 midnight or so and finish my day. And one night, I really overshot it. I woke up about 2:45 a.m. I'm taking my dog outside and listening to the family of owls that nest by the woods here, but he's just sort of staring at the darkness and growling. Now, we have raccoons, coyotes, all the normal stuff coming out at night. He's only done this a couple of times in his life, but my mind still jumps to the normal. As a woman living alone, though, it's worth paying attention to. But then I hear a sound, and to my ear, it sounds like me. More specifically, a tiny me calling my brother's name in this stupid way that I used to do when I was really little. Consciously, I just think, wow, I definitely misheard that. What a weird thought to bring up. And I set out trying to figure out what possible thing I could have heard that could in any way be misconstrued as a little girl's voice from the dark at 3 a.m. Leaves? Some weird bird or something? But I'm standing there, and the undercurrent of weird starts playing underneath my grown adult thoughts. What about all those skinwalker stories? But you're supposed to hear your loved one's voice calling your name, right? Not your voice from 30 years ago calling their name. Which led to a chilling thought of just how long something had to be back there watching me to come up with that sound. But overall, my illogical logic was sound. I still haven't moved. My puppy hasn't stopped growling. Then the owls hoot again, the most basic owl sound ever, followed immediately by this deep sort of masculine, humanish voice mocking them almost. And it was non-human enough that rather than confirming that there was a creepy dude in my forest, it confirmed the opposite. I said nope out loud, turned, and walked casually back into the house, pulling my dog with me. Once he was safely inside, I grabbed 2 of the biggest industrial flashlights that I had and went right back out. I'm ashamed to admit that I chickened out about 10 feet out of the door, chose life, and I just went back inside, locked all the doors, got my gun, yada yada yada. Now, I've been a night walker my whole life, and I can count on one hand the number of times that I've bumped into another person here. But eventually, I just decided that the neighbor's 18-year-old must have been out having a 3 a.m. joint in the woods or something, and just decided to scare me. Theory held up solid, until I heard this story on here the other day that multiple people have stories about something imitating an owl. Someone said that baby owls make that sound because they haven't learned to hoot properly yet. I've listened to that owl family for years though, and I have never heard that. I spent a lot of time researching baby owl sounds, hoping that that was the answer too, and all I could find was videos of them screeching. It was a very creepy sound, but nothing like what I heard. So, I guess my question is, could someone confirm for me either way, please? 9 out of 10, love living alone, but this is kind of throwing a wrench into my lifestyle here, and I guess I just want to clear this up. After I graduated last May, I decided to take up a job at my local jail. Nothing long-term, just figured that I'd work there for a year and save up some cash before college. Flash forward a little bit, and I'm only a few weeks into training. I've always liked the idea that ghosts really existed, but at that point I really couldn't say that I ever actually saw one. However, that all changed while taking post one night. The time was a little after 5 a.m. and I was sitting behind my desk, absolutely bored to tears. So, being a good little deputy, I was spinning around in my chair, honestly trying not to fall asleep. This was hour 11 of a 12-hour shift, so I'm just killing some time before I have to go home. Now, to give you a little visual of where I am, I'm in a giant room with a bunch of cells. At one end of the room is the officer's desk with big windows behind it. These windows are super reflective, so officers can look into the pod from the hallway, but inmates can't look out into the hallway from inside the pod. At the other end of this pod are all the cells. This particular pod has some cells that were behind a second pane of glass. I hope you're still with me because this is important, I promise. Anyways, I'm spinning around in my chair at my desk and happen to glance up at the reflective windows behind the desk. As I do, some movement catches my eye upstairs. There is someone walking around upstairs, out of their cell but behind the glass. I stare in disbelief for a moment and instantly freak out. I'm thinking somewhere along the lines of, holy heck, who is out of their cell at this hour? I'm about to get fired. I quickly turn around and see that nobody is up there now. I scramble and check the monitor that gives me control of the cell doors and make sure all of them are locked, which they are. I even go up there myself and make sure that everything is as secure as it can be. And somewhere in the middle of me making sure that I'm not about to get fired, it dawned on me that that was a ghost. I mean, there was no mistaking it. I 1000% saw someone up there. Now, I don't mean that I saw a quick little shadow or a suspicious looking speck of dust or something. I was distinctly looking at someone in an orange jumpsuit walking around up there. I mean, I could tell you this guy's haircut, his height, general build, and even what kind of beard he had. To be honest, I was totally banking on this happening at some point. I mean, from my first day, I could tell that this place was really haunted. I mean, I'd heard the stories. So I immediately get my corporal on the horn and tell her excitedly that I just saw a ghost. But things don't end here. After that, I was bragging to anyone and everyone about my little encounter, with some mixed reactions. My sergeant says that he doesn't really believe in ghosts, but some deputies told me that they've definitely seen some paranormal stuff on duty too. However, it's what the sergeant on day shift shared that has really stuck with me. He told me that they apparently had an inmate end their own life in that same pod a few years prior. I had already been told that by a few people who had been there a while. I gave a description of the guy that I saw, and we decided to look up the inmate just to see if they looked the same. And I'm telling you right now that it was definitely him. It was the guy that I saw walking around upstairs. Right down to his skinny face and his billy goat beard. There was no mistaking it. I've talked to some inmates about it too, and I've had more than one tell me that sometimes they can see or hear someone walk by their cells and peeking in at late hours of the night. It can't be a correctional officer that they're talking about because they're always wearing an orange jumpsuit. And well, that's my one and only spooky experience. I didn't have any notable encounters after that as well. I hope you found this interesting, and it's definitely something that is going to stick with me. My mum was born and raised in the high country of east central Montana. She came from a ranching people, and her father and my grandfather were genuine cowboys. She often did work around the ranch with him, so really not much shakes her to her soul. Except for what happened when she had to run into town when I was only 8 months old. The ranch that she was raised on was almost 2 hours away from the nearest town. You had to drive north on a highway for 30 minutes, then you had to drive on a dirt road for another 45 minutes across the Montana high country to get to the ranch where she was raised. I'm emphasizing this because it not only shows how far out into the pretty much nowhere she lived at the time, but it plays into why this story becomes so disturbing. So like I said, my mum had to run into town to get some groceries and baby supplies for me. She was driving on the long and isolated dirt road back to the ranch when she reaches into her purse on the passenger seat to get something. It slips out of her hand and into the passenger footwell. Fair enough. She then has to stop the car so that she can safely retrieve what she had dropped. She grabs it, and as she sits back up, she looks into the rearview mirror and sees a man about 100 feet behind the car running at her. Needless to say, she puts the car back into gear and she gets the heck out of there. As she's looking back at me in the car seat, making sure that I'm okay, she sees the guy give up running after her and run back into the ditch to hide. Of course, when she gets home, she tells her mum and dad, my grandparents, about what had happened, and they are stunned. But here's where it gets really disturbing, at least psychologically. My mum didn't see any cars or trucks parked along that dirt road for the entire way to the ranch. She also didn't see any people walking along the highway or dirt road, which raises even more questions. Like, how did he get out there? Why was he out there? And even more disturbing, what would he have done to my mum or an 8-month-old me? My mum said that the more she thought about it, the more disturbing it became. I've only ever asked my mum about this story twice, and after the second time, she told me to never ask her about it again. And to be honest, I completely understand why. I get messed up thinking about it too, and I mean, I can only imagine how she felt having directly experienced it. During a school break, me and my mum and one of my older brothers, we went to go and visit our uncle on his ranch in Nevada. I have trouble sleeping at the best of times, so one night I decided to walk around the perimeter of the ranch, just for some fresh air. I had made it all the way to the other side of the ranch too, to the far end of the pastures. From the last fence to a woodsy hill area is about 50 yards, I guess. I decided to stay and look up in the grassy area to look at the stars, and what no one told this city girl was that with no trees and no lights, save for the barn on the other side of the ranch, you can see so many stars. It was breathtaking to see the universe like that, in fact. I started whistling at one point, and then I heard a branch crack, so I stopped, a little startled by that. Then something else started to whistle right at me. I froze, and it seemed like every hair on my body stood straight up. I couldn't move, and the whistling got louder, and also got closer as well. It was the almost exact same nonsense melody that I was whistling not even 15 seconds ago. I know what you're thinking, but oh, birds are a thing, right? No, there was no way that this was a bird. I know the difference between a bird and whatever the heck this was, and this isn't even over yet. So I, the stupid girl in the horror movie, decided to say, hello? And something said, hello, right back to me, in my own voice. And yes, I know what my voice sounds like. Slightly raspy, faint, Bronx accent, usually lower pitched unless I'm excited or mad. And then it's usually so high pitched that my friends say that I sound like Harley Quinn. Another branch snapped, and that was my cue to book it. Back down around the paddocks, back to the barn and to the main house, which was about maybe 2 acres, I would guess. But the whole thing was like a blur to me. I have knee issues from a car crash, but I didn't feel even an ache as I sprinted all the way back to the main house. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I didn't tell anyone else about it too, despite my mum being extremely superstitious. I did a little bit of frantic Googling the day after, obviously, and the closest thing that I could come up with was actually a skinwalker. My parents recently bought a farm last year in Australia and have been building a property on it for their retirement. It's right beside a national park and reasonably close to the next property over. The only thing that sucked is that we have no cell service besides the top paddock where they're building their house. Not too dodgy though, right? Well, I'm a university student, 21, female, in my second year of nursing and frequently come up to the farm to help them out with their livestock and whatnot. At first, everything was fine. We had a small 2-bedroom cabin in the lower paddock that I stayed in every time that I came up. My room had a large window that faced into the national park, and at night when it was pitch black, it would freak me out a bit, but nothing serious. Sure, we had the usual noises of foxes and the livestock at nighttime and stuff like that, but it was really nothing out of the ordinary. But things really ramped up when I had to stay up there alone to feed the livestock for a few days while my parents were back in the city. I went about the usual chores, feeding the sheep, keeping an eye on our lambs, and checking in at the building site to keep an eye on everything. I went into town to get some dinner at the local pub, and by the time that I got home it was roughly 10 p.m. I would usually take my car up to the top paddock at night to call my friends, check social media, etc. My car was lit up by my internal navigation system that's always on, which meant that I couldn't really see outside the car besides from my headlights. I must have been midway through my social media scroll when I thought that I saw something black flash across the paddocks where my headlights were facing. At that, I drove my car in a quick circle to use my car's headlights as a massive torch and didn't see anything. No reflections of cattle's eyes like I usually do, or the usual fox or rabbit. I tried not to pay too much attention to it and went back to my social media scroll until I accidentally pressed my brakes, which allowed my brake lights to flood the paddock behind my car with an eerie red light. And the same black flash that I saw through my windshield flickered out of the corner of my eye in the rearview mirror. Now I was getting suspicious. I turned off the music I was listening to and just sat for a second, trying to assure myself that I was just tired. And after a few seconds of silence, I was relieved and was about to turn my car on to go back to my cabin, and that's when I heard what I can only describe as claws on my rear windshield, sort of like a tap-tap-scratch pattern. Now, I can tell you that I have never sped as fast as I did back to the cabin that night. That night too, I just couldn't shake the feeling of something watching me from the forest. You know that sort of tingling sense of something staring into the back of your head that you get sometimes? Well, after tossing and turning, I put up a newspaper in front of my window that faces the woods until it was completely covered, and the feeling immediately went away. Sleep didn't come easy, safe to say, that night. The following night, I chose to go to the top paddock while it was still reasonably light. All was peaceful, and I had all but forgotten last night's events. I was admiring the gorgeous pink sunset when I saw a flash of green in the sky travel for a split second and then disappear. Now listen, I'm not one for UFOs, but I know that it wasn't a helicopter because it was light enough to see the sky and the stars weren't even up yet. I thought that it was cool though, so I called one of my friends who was a massive skeptic about everything paranormal, and of course she thought that I was nuts and proceeded to give me a hard time for it. It started to get a bit dark for my liking though, so I went back to the cabin to cook some dinner. All was fine too until I went to sleep. The newspaper from the night before was still clinging to my window, but I woke up at around, I would say 2 a.m. I would guess, to the sound of the sheep making a racket. I grabbed my dad's rifle, assuming it was another fox, and went to take a look on foot with my spotlight. Now, usually when you bring a very bright light and you mess with the sheep who were already going nuts, you hear about it. Key word being usually. I walked over to the paddock and I sort of started scanning with my spotlight and didn't see anything. The sheep were bleating like crazy, but none were injured or even remotely in a corner of the paddock, huddled together like they usually do when there's a fox. That was until they all just suddenly went completely silent. I mean, 1 second they were so loud that they echoed around the hills, and the next it was just completely dead silent. And now I was truly scared. I raised my rifle and started looking around, feeling like everything around me had its eyes on me. It was then too, as I heard a thump of something heavy being dropped on the ground, heavy enough for me to even feel the vibration in my feet. And at that, I booked it back to the cabin and locked everything behind me. I was pacing around double-checking the doors and the windows when I heard it too. It sounded like humming, but distorted alongside footsteps. And whatever these footsteps were, it was as if they were limping and then sort of quickly recovering. It was around the cabin and it stopped at my bedroom window. I curled to the ground, gripping my rifle until my fingers were frozen in place. and I laid there pretty much all night until I was so exhausted that eventually I just fell asleep. I left first thing in the morning without even looking to see if there were any footsteps. Now, if anyone has any clue as to what the heck I just experienced, what this thing is, or can tell me what I can do, then please do comment below and let me know. I haven't been able to go back to my parents' farm, which I really regret that, but hopefully I can return soon. I grew up in a sleepy suburb in South Carolina in an upper middle class neighborhood. The neighborhood was built on the side of a small antebellum period slave plantation that had fallen to decay more than a century ago. My house was situated directly across the street from the plantation's old cemetery. I put that in quotes because there are no headstones, only crudely cut rocks that signified where people were already buried. There was only one bedroom in our house that overlooked the cemetery, and it was the one that I slept in as a child. When I was very young, I would always comment on seeing shadow people, dark humanoid shapes that would dance in and out of your peripheral vision. I'd be sitting in the living room playing with my DS or something like that, and see something walk across the adjoining kitchen, only to look up and see nothing. This was also a relatively common occurrence in this house. The worst thing, though, was the nightmares that I'd have in my childhood bedroom. Man, the nightmares. Before I was old enough to even watch my first horror movie, I would have these intense, graphic dreams. Nothing a child's brain should be able to conjure up like that. I had one reoccurring dream, too, where I would go to the bathroom only to find a person void of any skin weeping in a blood-filled bathtub. Yeah, terrible nightmares. The dreams were often hyper-realistic too, and would take place in my home with no alterations. I would often refuse to sleep in that room as well. The house was 2 stories, and I would often just fall asleep on a patch of carpet next to the stairs. When my sister moved out, I finally got out of that room. The nightmares and the insomnia stopped too, almost instantaneously. That room is used as my dad's office space now. I always make an effort to shut the door every night before I go to bed, but when I wake up to use the bathroom, it's always open without fail. I admit that it could be a draft, but the problem continued even after we replaced the doorknob. Even in the blazing hot South Carolina summer, that room too is always freezing cold. It'd be easy to chalk it up to childhood superstition, I know, but the strange occurrences continued well into my late teens. Now, my parents were always out of town on business, leaving 17-year-old me to my own devices for weeks at a time sometimes. I hated being in that house too alone, so I'd always have a few people spending the night while they were gone. My house began to build a bit of a reputation with my circle of friends as well. The first instance that I can think of was in my junior year of high school. I was with 4 friends and we decided to grab a pizza. One of the other friends decided to stay at the house and watch some TV and just keep an eye on my dog. And about 10 minutes after we left, I got a call from my friend and he seems genuinely shaken and told me to hurry up. It's about 10:30 p.m. at this point. He had put my dog on his leash and they were both standing in the driveway of my house when we got back. He said that shortly after we left, he heard loud banging coming from the upstairs of my house. We have a long hallway on the 2nd story, and he said that it sounded like multiple people running full sprint from one side to the other, just over and over again. My dog was apparently going ballistic, and he grabbed his leash, and the both of them just ran outside. Needless to say, he wasn't willing to stay that night. Another instance is just me and one of my friends. My parents had been out of town for a few days, so we were just having some brews and playing COD or something on the TV in my living room. It was getting super late, so we put on a movie and we sort of conked out after about an hour. I left him on the couch and went to sleep in my bedroom. But at around 3:30, I get shaken awake by my terrified friend. He He said that he woke up and was freezing cold, so he walked upstairs to grab a blanket out of the linen closet. He said that when he closed the door, he could barely make out my dog in front of him. My friend called to him and reached out his hand to pet him, but when he did, the shadow sort of drifted across the ground towards him and went through his legs. Not through the middle of his legs, like physically through his legs. He asked me to feel them too, and they were icy to the touch. We both just sort of hung out in the living room with pretty much every light in the house on after that. But the last story that I have has to do with my dog and my childhood bedroom about 2 years ago. My parents were yet again out of town and asked me to dog sit the floofer, and of course I obliged. It was around 9:30 on a hot summer night, and my dog just starts going absolutely ballistic for some reason and running around in circles almost like he was chasing something. He bolted it upstairs, still barking, until I hear him make it to the far side of the house, near my childhood bedroom, and the next thing that I hear is the door slam shut. It was incredibly loud, and there was obviously a lot of force behind it. Then all I could hear was him shrieking, almost like he was in severe pain. He's a fairly large lab husky chow mix, and I've never heard him make a sound like this. I, terrified, sprinted up the stairs after him and opened up the door to let him out. He came thundering out of the room and was desperately clawing at the door to the backyard. And I couldn't get him to come inside for like 2 days after that, leaving his food and water outside for him. Now, I mark myself as the superstitious type, but only because so much weird stuff has happened to me in that house throughout the years. I just get an angry foreboding feeling when I come back home these days. Am I crazy for believing that there's something else that I can't explain in that house? I felt insane until my friend started to see and experience the same stuff that I did. My mum won't even have a conversation with me about the prospect of something malicious being in that upstairs office space. And although this is extremely long-winded, I could honestly write a novel with how many more stories I have about this house. But I'll leave it for here for now, and I'm just wondering if there's anyone else living in the Deep South that has experienced anything like this, like seeing shadow people and stuff like that. I'd love for all of this to be easily dismissible, and on their own each story is, I guess, but with the years and years of strange occurrences, I just can't chalk it up to coincidence anymore. Anyways, that's my story or stories. I'm just confused and struggling to make sense of any of this. Hopefully somebody can shed a little bit of light at least on what's going on, either in that house or perhaps even the cemetery across the street. This happened late in November of 2017, and it was a weekday. I can't remember what day exactly, but I knew that it wasn't a weekend as the roads were pretty desolate. I was 33 at that stage, and we'd been working for a family on a ranch for about 4 years, and they had become like our second family, I suppose. We were on work visas from South Africa, so not native to the US, but pretty familiar with everything as we had been in the area for the full 4 years that we had worked for them. We decided to make the career and life change after I got burnt out at 29 in a corporate marketing career that wasn't going anywhere and was stealing my soul and will to live. We just wanted to scale down and have a more relaxed lifestyle, I suppose. Anyway, the ranch was in northern Utah, somewhere between Salt Lake City and Logan. I'm being pretty vague as the family is very well known and I would not like to identify them as a respect for their privacy. But we were almost getting ready to return to South Africa at that stage as our visas were running out and we wanted a bit of a holiday, I guess, as it had been a very busy year. Getting married, our daughter was born, etc. So we wanted to do a bit of sightseeing before we returned, and the owner offered to pay for the accommodation and provide spending money and his truck even if we would run an errand for him on the way. He had a couple of horses and a trailer that needed to be picked up from a ranch somewhere in Wyoming, with Cheyenne being the closest big city more than an hour away. We jumped at the opportunity as we basically had a week to get there and then a day to get back to his ranch. We visited some awesome places too. Park City, Flaming Gorge, Bear Lake, Yellowstone, Teton Village, etc. The whole trip was an amazing experience, except for the incident this story is about. That definitely put a bit of a damper on the excitement. We drove up to Park City the first day and spent the night with some friends there. And the incident happened on the second day of the trip, on the way between Flaming Gorge Reservoir and Bear Lake via Green River. So, we were driving and enjoying the scenery and had just crossed over the Utah-Wyoming border when we spotted the only vehicle for the past maybe 30-odd miles, an old red-brown pickup truck that was parked on the opposite side of the road. There were two guys inside, and when we were about maybe 150 feet from them, they pulled onto the road to make a U-turn. I was pretty annoyed by that, as I was doing about 80 at the time and had to make a hard brake and swerve onto the oncoming traffic to avoid having an accident with them. I punched on the horn and flipped the middle finger out the window when I passed them too. They sped up, flashing the lights behind me, but I just punched it and left them behind. I was driving my employer's new Ram 2500 diesel truck, so it had no shortage in power to get away. A few miles down the road, I couldn't see them behind me anymore, so I assumed that they must have turned off. Probably about 40 to 50 miles up the road, we pulled into a little America to get diesel and some food. When we got out of the shop, we saw the truck parked across the lot, but nobody was in it. We decided to load up and head out, as I wasn't in the mood for an argument with some redneck cowboys. So we headed out and thought that was the last that we would see of them. But boy, were we wrong. We were looking for interesting places to stop and things to see on the route, and about 45 minutes or so after we left Little America, we spotted a sign that pointed to Fossil Butte National Monument. We pulled in and literally had the place to ourselves. We were the only car in the parking lot, so we walked around and couldn't see much as it was closed, so we decided to head out. But right as we got to the truck, we spotted the red pickup speeding into the parking lot. I panicked, my wife jumped into the back with our 5-month-old daughter, and I ran around and jumped into the driver's seat. Right as I wanted to pull out, the pickup pulled in behind us, blocking us from exiting. I was terrified at this point, screaming at my wife to call 911. The two guys jumped out of the truck and started running towards us, one on each side of the truck. Only then did I notice that both had their faces covered by what looked like handkerchiefs, like what cowboys usually wear around their necks. Right at this time as well, my wife said, panicking, that she didn't have cell service. I was making split-second decisions and noticed that, except for the curve and a signpost off to the left, there was nothing really solid in front of the truck. So I threw the truck into drive, swung the steering to the right and floored it. The truck bounced over the curb, plowed through the sagebrush, and made a wide turn through the field back toward the parking area. And we raced for the exit. Now, the layout of the parking lot was as follows. There's a one-way entrance, the road splits, and the parking runs into a one-way loop that exits at the same entrance. If it doesn't make sense, then you can pull it up on Google Maps with satellite view. That will explain it a little bit better. We were parked at the far end of the parking lot though, and we were now going through the parking the wrong way to get out. The other guys were back in their truck racing to cut us off. They beat us to the entrance too, as they had a much shorter distance to cover than we did. They proceeded to park their truck sideways across the road by the gate, so there was no way that we could get around without causing some serious damage to my boss's brand new truck. We stopped about 150 feet from them. One guy had an aluminum bat and the other had some sort of a bar or tire iron that he was swinging around. My wife was crying in panic, our daughter was screaming, and I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. And even though the situation was still dodgy, I felt like we were out of immediate danger at this point. The two guys didn't move towards us, just standing next to their truck staring us down. It felt like hours, but was probably less than a few minutes, and I told my wife to buckle our daughter in and look behind the seat for the rifle my boss kept there. She found it and passed it to me. I wasn't worried about the bat in the bar, but in case one of them had a firearm. Obviously, I didn't want to make the situation worse, so I was still contemplating whether I should use it if they approached or threatened us again, when I noticed a camper turning off the highway towards us. The two guys must have also noticed, as they looked at each other, got in their truck, and at that they just sped off. They turned the way that we came from onto the highway, and we could no longer see them, and so we started driving. We passed the camper and the old couple gave us a friendly wave. We wonder if they knew that to us they were angels sent from heaven that day, or probably not, right? And the story ends there pretty anticlimactically. We had a pretty amazing but uneventful, at least if you count dodgy encounters, rest of the trip. We told my boss what happened when we returned, and his explanation was that they were probably looking for trouble, and that is why they cut us off with the U-turn, and then when people react, they start a confrontation. It sounded plausible at that stage, until about a week later when we were already back in South Africa. I was lying in bed one night thinking over the encounter when it just sort of struck me. From where we first encountered them, when they cut us off with the U-turn, until the Fossil Butte Visitor Center, was over 3 hours and close to about 120 miles. You don't follow someone that far unless you have some seriously sinister intentions. They also must have purposely followed us there, as there are many different routes that they could have taken that would have led them away from us, and we turned off the interstate and made about 2 or 3 other turns since leaving Little America too. And that certainly made me lie awake for a few more hours, wondering just what their intentions were and what would have happened if that old couple with the camper didn't turn off right when they did. For some background, I'm a male in my late 20s living in northern Canada. And last weekend, I got a call from a friend telling me that while on his ski-doo trip, he went on by my cabin as it was on his route, and that it looked like someone broke into it and smashed all of the windows. Devastated, I went out to my shed to load up my ski and sled with boards and tarps to repair the windows, hopeful to keep some of the snow out of my cabin until I could probably replace the windows in the spring. And just as I was about to leave, I got this, gut feeling that something was wrong and that I should take a rifle just in case, because better to be safe than sorry. As I started my ride into the woods, I noticed the sky getting darker, and I thought to myself, great, now I'll have a storm to deal with too. Luckily it wasn't a snowstorm, but just a thick fog that rolled in quickly. There's nothing more unsettling too than being alone in the woods like that, encased in a thick fog, especially with God knows what around you. But I finally get to my cabin, and sure enough, all of my windows are smashed. I unload my gear and get to work, trying to get my cabin secure as fast as I can and get the heck out of there. At some point though, I feel like all of a sudden I'm being watched, which gives me a bit of a lump in my throat because I can't see anything in this fog. Then I hear something moving through the trees. I automatically grab my rifle and put my back to the cabin, hoping that if something comes out of the fog that I'll be ready for it. My first thought was that it was the terrible person who broke into my cabin, coming back under the cover of the fog to see what else they could take. But then I realized that no Ski-Doo approached me, as I would have heard one from miles away as it was so quiet out there. After waiting a while with no more noises coming from the woods, I go back to work, get my windows fixed, and I return back to my Ski-Doo to get the heck out of there. After a short ride, I notice something that looks like pot poles in the middle of the trail, and it turns out to be polar bear tracks leading towards my cabin. That creepy feeling of being watched and the noises from the woods was probably a polar bear stalking me, and was the actual culprit of the break-in at my cabin. What disturbs me most is that, honestly, I would never have seen it coming with all that fog that day, and my rifle, well, it would have been practically useless against such a huge animal like that. To this day, I genuinely feel lucky to be alive. This story happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s and was studying in Paris, France. I was going home from uni. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day, I felt slightly uncomfortable though. I could sense some guy looking intensely at me. I was used to unpleasant, unsolicited gazes, but this time, his gaze felt sort of beastly. It's hard to explain why, but I felt like a prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually got off. Like I learned in the movies, I waited until someone else pressed the stop button and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him get off the bus though. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder and there he was, a few meters behind me. I had the distressing feeling his eye had just looked away the moment that I turned. I walked into a shop quickly, took my phone and pretended to be taking a call, and when I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as fast as I could. I kept looking back on the busy street. I zigzagged across the street at every crossing, and finally I believed that him getting off at the same stop as me was just a coincidence. When I reached my building, I looked back one last time, and there he was again, his alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing the stairs 4 at a time. I reached the top floor, squeezed through my door, locked it, and froze. My intercom was now ringing. Don't ask me why I picked it up. I regretted it the moment that I did. But I could hear the opposite flat intercom ringing as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping that someone would open. But now he knew my name. Gabriel. I felt like a deer in the headlights, frozen. "Open the door, please," said a pleading voice. "I just want to talk to you." Somehow, I couldn't even move or speak. "Come to the window," he added. "Look at me. You'll see I'm not a bad guy." Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment in the building. I was not going to make that mistake, though. I hung up in shock. I waited by the door without moving for what seemed like hours. When I finally managed to calm myself, I called my long-distance boyfriend. "Call the police," he said immediately. Why didn't I call the police? I don't know. Today, it would be the first thing that I would do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was, though. I called my best friend instead. I just didn't want to feel alone, I guess. I told her all about it, and after a while, I felt a bit safer. We started laughing, and suddenly the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I'd come home. I answered. "Gabriel," said the voice. "Open, please." I still remember the chills that I felt that day. He was still there. He was there all this time. I was silent, petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation. "Gabriel, let me in. I'm so thirsty," he said. "Just give me a glass of water." This broke the tension, and I hung up. Curled up in a corner, literally in recovery position, terrified, I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew that he couldn't hear me from the hall, but I was scared to even breathe. The intercom rang again, and again. I didn't answer this time. Instead, I crouched to the sofa and just fell asleep in exhaustion. But I did hear the intercom ring one more time, in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning, afraid to leave my apartment. I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note in my mailbox. It said, "Gabriel, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened to me." We immediately went to the nearest police station, and the police listened, and of course they told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install digicode on the building door the same day, and wrote a message to each of my neighbors asking to not open the door to anyone that they didn't expect. He sat in the cafe in front of my building with 2 friends every evening for more than a week, but I never saw the stalker again. After this episode, I use a different route to and from uni every day. I kept my phone tightly in my hand and looked back every few meters. Today, I'm still very observing of my surroundings. I never enter the door if I'm not expecting someone. So, people, if you ever find yourself in any kind of uncomfortable situation like this, trust me, call the police. And don't be an idiot like me.